Welcome back to another episode of the Hodgecast. Today, we're going down that rabbit hole. And to help show me how deep it goes, we've got Matt LaCroix all the way over from the States. Welcome, Matt. So today, you're going to be pretty much leading on this, I guess. I'm just sort of here to help you out and maybe challenge and unpack where appropriate. But before we get into that, I suspect a lot of my audience will be familiar with your work, given the mutual connections that I've had on the show and who watch. But just give us a little bit of an overview as to who you are, your background, and why you're over here in the UK.
Thanks, Daniel. It's great to be here. And flew across the pond for you on this one, right?
Oh,
I think it's going to be well worth it. You've been a big fan of a lot of my work. You've been following it for a while, and I really appreciate that. You really put that extra effort in of intense curiosity and interest in this lost chapter of our history, right? Understanding what are our origins? How far back does our story go? So I have been on this road for quite a long time, exploring this, and I'm trying to understand it. And there was a lot of different chapters of it that have led me to this point, but I'm now in this really unique and very special position where I have uncovered something very significant with, along with my research and my team around the world. And we're putting together something that I think will be absolutely pivotal for the future of understanding ancient lost origins, chapters of our earlier story, redefining who we are. So I'm a writer. I'm developing a documentary right now. I do, of course, lots of, podcasts, and then I also travel around the world to explore these hotspots. So when people usually will throw up the idea of like, what is ancient history? What are you looking for? It's not everywhere. You can't just go to any ancient site and find specifically what I'm looking for. There are telltale things that I'm clued in, that I'm focused on, things that are anomalies, different kinds of structural masonry techniques that are from an older chapter, right? So you'll often have maybe adobe mud brick kind of more primitive work, or it's kind of crude stonework. And then sometimes these sites, you'll have far more sophisticated ancient stonework underneath it. But again, so the real question that we're going to open up today and then go down that truly what is a rabbit hole is, well, what chapter were those built? When were those built? Are they from a chapter of human history that has not been acknowledged yet by mainstream academia?
Mm-hmm. Thanks for articulating that. I was trying to work out when it was I came across you. You did something with, I think, Randall Carlson. So I think from you doing something with him, that led me onto your page, and then I was just sort of fast. I mean, I love this subject anyway, but yours in particular, I think just obviously you're very passionate about what your findings, your research, but also as well, I think it's you make it quite. See, a lot of this stuff, if you're not really into it, you might hear a soundbite like about the pyramids, or but you kind of check out on the other things. Whereas with yourself, I think because you bring that high level of energy to your content, it becomes a lot more. Oh, hang on, put the phone to one side. I'm fully dialed in with what you have to say, and also as well, I think how I got into this was I've always been of the belief, even as a child, that the timeline that we were taught in school is just not all what it's cracked up to be, which I'm sure we'll get into. So do you want to kick us off, Matt? Tell us, where kind of like the crux of your research begins, and then take it away, mate.
Yeah, I want to start out with a reasoning truth protocol for finding truth, right? I feel like people in the world need to understand that you have to be your own researchers. I love so much that people follow my work and others, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of noise, right? There's a lot of people saying a lot of stuff. How do you navigate that? How do you figure it out? So I want to give everybody a reasoning truth protocol to help them out. And you might know it in where we are right now, we're in the land of Shakespeare, right? Mm-hmm. And we're in the land of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Do you know Sir Arthur Conan Doyle?
I know the name. You can ask me any question.
Sherlock Holmes, my friend.
Okay.
So he's the writer of Sherlock Holmes, and he created what I consider to be the perfect reasoning principle for finding truth. So let me see if you remember this, right? Once you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. Now, that may seem like a simple context of understanding, but it's a principle that has what I consider the perfect way to find truth. Because think about it. When you're trying to find something and you're trying to understand what's real, and you're like, well, is this make sense? Does this make sense? And you're trying to understand it. people get stuck often in this place of not knowing how to navigate that. And everybody needs to be their own researcher. You have to, it's one thing to hear what I'm about to say and others, but it's another thing to go do your own research and then understand, wow, well, maybe he's telling the truth. And so I encourage everybody to use that principle going forward in your journey of seeking truth. So I wanted to start there. But essentially, we are going down a journey right now of what you said is, well, what is our story, right? Well, let's start with what the understanding is based on conventional, traditional narratives, right? So like you just brought up, you go through, high school, college, university, whatever, and you learn a very specific history. And it's repeated everywhere because it's part of education systems and old doctrines and things like that, right? And it states that, and actually this is a great moment we can pull up the timeline, the existing timeline that already exists. So we're told that human civilization, so the separation between Neolithic hunter-gatherers, right? And when civilizations emerged, metallurgy, animal husbandry, agriculture, all that, we're told that first pivotal moment that defined human civilization occurred somewhere about 6,000 years ago, we'll call it, okay? And that's considered to be in what's called Uruk, in the time period of Gilgamesh. Now, when I was going down this road of looking at all the evidence, and particularly my focus became very much interested in what are the oldest tablets and stories that have ever been written? Like, how do we go back and find the earliest stories, the things that are the oldest, right? Because if you want to go try to find the truth, you have to try to find the origins of your oldest form of knowledge, because everything over time gets rewritten and changed a little bit around. And so I became extremely interested, I want to say about 10 years ago or more, in ancient Mesopotamian history. Because as the traditional narrative does accurately state, civilization started there. I agree. But the time period in which we're told that it began 6,000 years ago, 6,500 years ago, is not the beginning of civilization, but the reboot of civilization. It's when it restarted again, and then everything after that point then defined who we are. So when, for instance, look at the world we're in today. This is it couldn't be a more better time to point this out. We have silly wars from ridiculous reasons for why they're being fought and all these different things. And yet we live in a world where consciously society is rejecting that. I don't want that anymore. We're not in that same world anymore. Now you look at it on paper and they think, well, it's justified now because out of these civilizations that emerged in ancient Mesopotamia, Neo-Akkadian civilizations, right? I'm not going to mention the Sumerians yet. Neo-Akkadian civilizations, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, they were empires, war empires, okay? So we emerge out of this place and go immediately into becoming war empires, fighting and battling each other. They're all conquering, and you have, I was just in, of course, the British Museum, which was an amazing experience, seeing these tablets in their original form, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, Atrahasis, right? In that location. And when you go into these Assyrian reliefs, you can see war everywhere. They're fighting, they have, bow and arrow, and they're on horses and they're fighting. And those empires just kept continuing throughout history.
Sorry, so do you think, sorry, I'll bring you back on track. Do you think that's maybe because that's our animal instincts as humans, but our animal instinct is to fight?
Well, let me ask you this. So if I use this analogy all the time. If you have two dogs that are born, and one dog goes to a nasty family, horrible people, kick it, beat it, it turns into this nasty, horrible dog, right? And the other dog goes to a loving and amazing family, and it's got all that support it needs. And what are the differences in those two dogs, right? What's the nature of that dog?
You become a subject of your environment.
Is that dog supposed to be that? Like, what defines that dog? Now, I'm not trying to say we're dogs, and I'm not even trying to say we're necessarily in the same kind of animal kingdom as that, because I don't think we are. But what I'm trying to say is that just because we've been conditioned to do certain things doesn't mean it defines us, right? When you look at ancient tribes, a lot of indigenous groups, like especially in the Amazon and others, war was a very small part of their life. If anything, was small skirmishes, but mostly they lived in more of like a peaceful world, right? The reason I'm saying all that is it's actually a lot more important than people understand, because we're using that as a justification to continue our actions now, because we're saying, well, that defined us, but it doesn't at all. And so what I'm finding and laying out and uncovering for the world is that, look, that was not how we began. That was just coming out of survival mentality, having to start over again. So everybody understands the last ice age. So we're talking 12,000 years ago when it ended. After those events, we call the Older and Younger Dryas, there were catastrophes that are beyond comprehension on this earth that wiped out what I firmly believe and can prove is a lost chapter of our history. But because of those catastrophes, and like Dr. Robert Schoch talks about, and who I work with, he was on my team, he calls it, maybe he has a term, he calls it solar-induced dark age, where you might have such extreme conditions after this time period that's why there was less continuation than we would expect from that previous chapter, and why it threw us into more of that violent hunter-gatherer mentality, where it made us more in a survival mentality. We became that violent dog. We were raised by the wrong family. And so humanity is in that other place, but we're like, wait, that's not where we're supposed to be though. Okay. So when I uncovered what I did, and I found this entire chapter of human history in which I believe it's longer than our current chapter now, which is mind-boggling to consider. I believe that this civilization existed for over 20,000 years.
Wow.
And if we consider our current civilization now, we were horse and buggy 600 or 700 years ago. Think about that for a minute. You look at our entire last couple thousand years, we go from, horse and carriage and fighting medieval wars to, just being in this massive technological age. But what have we lost? Who are we? Where do we start? And maybe everything that we're doing now is not necessarily what we're supposed to be doing.
Just to add a bit more meat on the bone there for the listeners, I completely subscribe to everything you've said there, Matt. I think the oldest Homo sapien skull that's been carbon dated is 300,000, thereabouts 300,000 years ago. So if you do a timeline, sort of like there's the skull, there's as we're talking, what Matt's just described is like literally a grain of sand, a slither in the grand scheme of things. And obviously, when you look at like the Holocene that we're currently in, and the Pleistocene, and all the I can never say the word, but the temperatures over time. Who's to say that there wasn't civilizations in? Because we're right in thinking the reason they say civilization begun in the Holocene is because of the temperature was warm enough to allow us to have agriculture. That's what the mainstream tell us. So who's to say in these other warmer periods there wasn't civilizations there? I've always kind of, and I don't want to kind of jump the gun a bit because I know you're going to lead some things in, but I've often gone with this theory of breakaway civilizations, but I don't want to jump straight onto that just yet. So I just wanted to put a bit of context there for the listeners.
So, absolutely. So what we're talking about is a pre-Ice Age civilization. Now, that whole context about being warm enough for agriculture is not true at all, because all you would simply have to do is go to places that are arid now, and they wouldn't have been arid then.
So you don't buy into that at all? Okay.
In fact, a lot of that is, I consider, bad science. I'm going to give you an example of bad science in this. That it's a context in this. When you look at during the last Ice Age, like Randall Carlson talks about this all the time. I love this. He talks about how we have evidence, and people don't know this, is that there were 44 million megafauna that died. Megafauna means large animals that died in the northern hemisphere at that transition of the Pleistocene to Holocene. So meaning 11,600 years ago on, to our current time. We're in the Holocene now, but that division out of the last Ice Age, known as the interglacial period, was absolute catastrophes on the Earth. Now, why do I bring that up? Because scientists will say that all those 44 million megafauna in these massive graveyards, all dead that are lying there with food undigested in their stomach and covered by black mats from volcanic eruptions and all these things. We're told by academics and scientists that indigenous groups, Native American groups, overhunted all of these animals, which they would never live in an imbalance ever. That was the core principle they had. Overhunted all of them, they went extinct because of overhunting, which is the craziest thing you could ever imagine in the world.
When Randall articulated that for me when I first heard it, I thought, yeah, you've got, because I probably would have subscribed to that initially. But then when you stopped and thought, well, if we were hunter-gatherers, surely why would you choose to go and kill like a woolly mammoth? That's a lot of hard work to be able to
Well,
topple.
not why you would kill one woolly mammoth. I'm not saying that. Why you would kill thousands. When they don't live in that world where they just kill everything and they don't have a respect for it. Never. Native American indigenous traditions, whatever you are around the world, they understood the core principles that this lost civilization understood that we don't now, which is that you must live in harmony and balance with your world. You must. And that's the whole point. So we look at them as being primitive, but maybe they're just trying to live in harmony with that world. Do we really need all this excess in our life? What is it doing for us? So I say that. Why do I say that? Because we're being hidden, that it's being hidden that how extreme those events were. Because if people start asking questions about how extreme those events were, it then leads down a whole different rabbit hole of, well, wait a minute. So 44 million megafauna died from an extreme event at the end of the last ice age? Wow, that's not what we're told. So what was that event? What was that like? Well, geology and history is told to us through gradualism, like Randall says, right? We're told that things happen very slowly and that catastrophes are like localized. Not the case. We are looking at events in history that we have never experienced in the last 12,000 years. And I want to be very clear about that. This isn't, you look at different Tunguska events and different things in the ancient world, I mean, within our last few hundred years, and people think they're big events, but they're nothing compared to what we're seeing in records from ancient times. And those records come from, I do a lot of climatology studies. So I study Greenland ice cores, Antarctic ice cores. I study ancient lava fields like the Lost Champ lava fields. And even there's ancient trees that have been found that you can use rings to basically determine what different climates periods are like. And what we're finding, which is what I'm setting up, is that this time period of, say, 14,500 years ago to 11,600 years ago, it's like 2,000 years, right? Over 2,000 years. We had absolutely catastrophes that were so extreme on the earth that they were enough to wipe out an entire chapter, a global civilization that was here, that had reached advancements in ways that we couldn't even comprehend today. Very different kinds of ways, though. It was enough to destroy all of them, and that whatever survived and the remnants of them that survived tried to maintain that knowledge, but it was ultimately largely lost. Okay, and then we look at places. Are you familiar with Derinkuyu and Kaymakli?
I know the place, but I don't know much about its history.
In southern Turkey, they, within the last 50 years, have found the largest underground cities on Earth. Okay, we're talking about complexes that go down over half a mile into the earth. Massive. Things that we've never even found any of the rubble and how they cleared them. We have no idea how they built them. We're talking about complex systems of rooms and schools and places for animals. An entire world that you could create underground to live. Why would a civilization ever do that? Unless there was something so catastrophic outside that you couldn't be out there.
But that's tying to, because obviously that's in Turkey, Göbekli Tepe as well, that was buried underground as well. So that's...
There's more than just that were buried. In fact, Ionis has also been shown to be buried as well.
Okay.
Is there was this understanding that there was devastating things that were coming and they had to protect them. So for those who don't know, I'm sure if some people are hearing this, they've heard of maybe Derinkuyu. Kaymakli is a sister city. Now, I want to bring up another point about that before we get into everything else. At the very bottom of Derinkuyu, you have to go down level after level after level, okay? It's, if anyone wants to look at it, Derinkuyu is an absolute astonishment in the ancient world. How they built all that, air shafts, right? Giant stones to roll in front of the doors to seal them off so they could survive for potentially maybe hundreds of years. We don't even know. But the reason I say that is this. If you go all the way to the bottom of Derinkuyu, way away from where the tourists can go, archaeologists found a tunnel system almost like a navigating tunnel system, like a subway tunnel system type of thing, right? Where you can navigate between Derinkuyu and Kaimakli, 5 miles long.
Wow.
They cut a 5-mile long tunnel at the bottom, or over half a kilometer down between these two cities. Now, why would you do that? Unless you couldn't go outside, right? Mm-hmm. So you're like, well, my aunt lives in Kaimakli. I haven't seen her in like 40 years, right? So I'm going to go head over to Kaimakli and take that journey and go see how the family's doing, right? These seem to have been created to survive enormous time periods. And I think that there was an understanding in the ancient world that this was a place of refuge because it was understood that there were other catastrophes that have occurred in history. So now we're not talking about just one. We're now talking about more than one. And I want that to be very clear by people. Now, remember in the ancient stories of, I'm sure you've heard the stories of Solon going down that Plato then wrote about with Atlantis, right? Well, that story is very real. Solon went down and met with 2 very important priests in ancient Egypt before anyone in the Western world had ever been there. Now, some people believe that's a myth, and I want to displace that right now. Because what he did is he went down to this ancient temple called the Temple of Neith. Okay, it's in the Sais Delta of Egypt. And Solon is Western Greek philosopher. He meets up with these 2 high-level priests. One of them is called Sonchus, and the other one is called Xenophus of Heliopolis. So Xenophus of Heliopolis comes from Heliopolis to meet there, and they know that it's this great meeting of a Greek philosopher, and they want to, meet up and exchange ideas and talk about history and ancient things. So we're told that story isn't true. All of it's a myth and an allegory. And yet the Temple of Neith was very real. In fact, Plutarch, another historian, was the last Western Greek philosopher to visit ancient Egypt before largely most things were destroyed. And most people don't even know about what Plutarch found, is that when he went into the Temple of Neith, he recorded the inscription that's written on the walls. And it's the most beautiful thing. It says, it basically talks about Neith as the mother womb goddess of the universe, right? And it says, I am all that ever was, ever will be. It's like this beautiful eternity thing, right? Of her existence. And I say all that because all of a sudden that story becomes very real. It's not a myth anymore, right? It's a very real story of that meeting. Now, I say that because Solon is told by these temple priests that there was a lost civilization, an ancient civilization that long predated the Greeks, and that they were destroyed. He says, you Greeks remember one deluge, but there have been many, mostly of water and fire. And it describes how there was an entire chapter of human history in which we reached incredible heights in ways that are very different than now, that was being recorded in the Temple of Neith. It was a temple that was dedicated to ancient knowledge, ancient timeline information. And that temple was subsequently destroyed right after Plutarch's visit. So that all those inscriptions, he's the only one that recorded them, and then it's gone. It disappears into history. Well, when you take that information, you say, okay, so there was a chapter of history, we think of Atlantis, right? And this ancient lost chapter. Well, how does that fit into all this? That's what I believe all this is that comes out of this, okay? And I say all that because we know that there isn't one major disaster event in history, but more than one, which is how these ancient civilizations would have known about previous catastrophes to then need to go build Derinkuyu and Kaimakli. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Because they were aware of a previous event that had occurred that had destroyed the old world. So when they built this new world up, they then recognized that could happen and then put these means in place to preserve their survival so that their knowledge can never be lost. Those 2 catastrophes I have been working very carefully to map out and create a timeline for, and then putting everything together that I've found around the world, which we haven't even talked about yet, we can actually recreate, for the first time potentially, this lost chapter of human history with incredible detail, with dates of things like ancient Egypt when it first began, when things first started, and then having plenty of time for the emergence of what we would think of as Atlantis and these other terms that have been used throughout history. So I just wanted to lay that foundation down so that we understand where we're going with this timeline. And then, of course, we can go down the journey of, what this civilization was and the evidence for, how we can understand them through the lens of our current time now.
No, I think you've laid the foundations perfectly there, Matt. I think as well, whenever I have people on the show who talk about these subjects, there's always a common thread with there's constant pushback and cherry picking from mainstream academia and archaeology. What's quite unique about yourself is you collaborate with people like on these. I know Robert Schoch's a geologist, so people will consider him academia, but he's obviously most notably the water erosion hypothesis of the Sphinx. So he kind of challenged the status quo on that, coming from an academic perspective. But I think it'd be useful to just highlight that you do work with archaeologists on this. You're not this dogmatic alternative view, and that's it.
No, absolutely. That's a great point. I appreciate you bringing that up. I am not trying to be the person that puts up a middle finger to all of academia and says, the hell with you guys. Mm-hmm. I actually work with archaeologists and geologists around the world. And so I have 3 archaeologists that I work with on my team that are part of this documentary that I'm putting together. Of course, Dr. Robert Schoch, a famous geologist, and I have other experts like polymath experts, sacred geometry experts, Robert Eber Grant's on the team. So, but not only that, but I have a very good relationship and I have deep respect for the head archaeological excavators at these sites around Van, Turkey, which is where the focus of my work is, right? I'll give call outs to Professor Ishmael. I love these guys, right? Professor Cosmo and of course, Professor Ishikli. These guys are doing phenomenal work. And I would never want to just tell them their work is wrong or step on their toes. I'm not trying to do that. In the end of the day, we have to understand that archaeology and science as a whole has become so fragmented to this silo of like an ivory tower because everyone else has built this narrative of our human experience and the human story. And all these scholars and academics have written books about which culture came when and what happened when. And when you have archaeologists that come later that study that, they can't just come and decide to disagree with that. I don't know if people know that, but that's not something where if they're out and they maybe have an idea how something might be from a different time period, if they do try to do that, okay, so I want to support archaeologists here and make this clear. They can lose funding, they can lose their job, they can lose all ability to even do what they want to do as archaeologists. So I imagine, and I know that a lot of the archaeologists that are listening to this are probably feeling this, but they can't say it, is that they have this incredible amount of pressure to just continue the narrative and not question anything. But that's not what science is. Science is the exploration and the objective exploration of truth, no matter where it leads. And that, unfortunately, is what has led today to science being, in my opinion, very broken, because it doesn't do that anymore, which is why I've been able to find what I am, because I am very well studied. I have decades of experience of studying archaeology, climatology, geology, ancient history, all of it, right? And so when I came into this and I was working with them and trying to understand it, I recognized that something huge had been missed. Now, the ultimate question is, Daniel, and I know people listening to this will, when we get to the end, and I want to propose this question now, is whether or not this was known. And I do believe it was. But imagine you create systems here, systems of reality, like the Matrix, right? It's a Matrix is just a system of reality and how we understand things. And you build it the way we built it. And it's like a cog we're all like cogs in this machine of this system, right? Let's say you created that system and you initially wanted people to be orderly and doing their jobs and being part of that little society, but not really asking questions, not really doing what they're supposed to be doing. You create the system, but you do it too well. And let's say you realize there's an entire other reality that's supposed to exist. And maybe we'll call it a harmony that we're supposed to be in that we're not. And you recognize that it exists, but can you say anything? What happens if you do? What happens if the very creators of the system itself acknowledge that there's an entire other system that exists that we should be living in, how do they then look? They look like the bad guys. Society would freak out. You guys, what you've orchestrated this fake world for us and make us do all these horrible things, it would be chaos. And so I've realized that they were never allowed to say anything. Even if they knew, they couldn't. It had to come from the outside, because then the systems themselves could transform and pretend there was never a division between that system. And I think that's what's happening right now.
I concur. I think I've always been of the belief that we're indoctrinated from children into this system. You know, you go through education. You know, what school hours are typically 9 till 3. Then once you leave education, you go to work, you get a job, typically a 9 to 5. Maybe you might do something a bit more extravagant. You're constantly embedded into a system. And then that becomes your reality, your perception.
Yeah.
And I've often, and you know, just a side note, I was in with David Icke last week, so I don't want to sound too much on that side of things, but I do kind of agree with what David mentioned in relation to why is it there's 8 billion people on the planet? Why is it that the few control the many? Where's that? And I think it is a case of this indoctrination, manipulation, challenge your perception of what is true and what isn't.
100% agree. And I think, like a lot of things in history, we had an inversion of secret societies that the core principles of knowledge and wisdom and creating a perfect society became inverted into the opposite, where they realized certain truths, but that they didn't want to tell the masses. And so they keep them in the dark and then basically create the opposite, you know, because of control, fear, to create that system, right? Like, right. Look at ancient Rome, right? Give them these giant violent games and give them all the bread and all these circuses, and the people won't focus on the problems, right? They'll just focus on this entertainment. Very much like we see the world today, is that people are just being constantly entertained, right? Their time. Imagine how people spend most of their time. They work all day, they're exhausted. You think that person's going to want to do a whole bunch of ancient history research and reading? Probably not. They're going to go watch a movie, play a game, listen to some music, just because their time has been drained. Their energy has been drained. So I say all that because what I'm about to introduce and what we're about to go down is the evidence that I think is unequivocal. This is going to be something that will shift the future, that we will realize that we're not doing really any of what we're supposed to be doing here, and that we're largely living in a very inverted world, in a very inverted reality, and that those who are making these systems are aware of this and are actually allowing it. And this is important that people listening to this. Why am I not dead right now? Seriously, because what I've found, and you'll see when I go over this, because I think the very systems in place understand that they become unbalanced. The very organizers that have created the systems understand that it's gone too far. And then in order to bring everything back into balance, or you risk entire ecosystem collapses on Earth and our entire potential destruction of our civilization, right? So in order to protect the sovereignty of that, there's a recognition that these systems have now outpaced their function, or whatever you want to call it. And now there's this acknowledgement that this does need to come back. And I say that because I have had a surprisingly small amount of pushback or anything negative to this. And I'm very curious about whether or not it is actually something that is being allowed to happen, okay, across the board. So let's go all into it, right? Let's dig into it. What all this is, let's lay it all out so that everybody in the audience can understand it. And let's go down this rabbit hole. And I want everyone to start by clearing your mind, and let's do like a reset of what we understand about our timeline, who we are, history. The idea that something old has to be primitive looking. Let's get rid of that, right? Just because something is ancient and old does not mean it needs to be primitive. Anything, the lost chapter of human history didn't build anything primitive. So everything you're looking at with adobe mud brick or crude stone is from later cultures that had no idea of how to build more advanced things, right? And that's where all this began. So I mentioned when we started that I was exploring ancient Mesopotamian history, okay? That's where my journey in this really began. Because as I'm reading ancient cuneiform tablets, the oldest recorded records of history, cuneiform is a wedge type of...
Can you read cuneiform, or do you
Well,
choose a translator?
cuneiform is not actually a language; it's a writing style. So that's a
Okay.
misunderstanding in most of the world. Is that there are languages that use cuneiform, and they're all slightly different variations, but they're not. It's not actual language. So you have Neo-Akkadian, Assyrian, and Babylonian, even Urartian, all use cuneiform wedges. Okay, but this is the problem that people don't often know, and sometimes academia doesn't even acknowledge in the right way, is that those have distinctive time periods that belong to different groups. So you can't read an ancient tablet from the Assyrians and have it necessarily say the same thing as it said in the Akkadians, because they come later, they rewrite stories, they change things around. That's how we've done all throughout human history, right? So I wanted to get to the origins of the oldest stories ever written. Who's the best translators in the world, right? Samuel Kramer, right? George Smith. These are the premier Assyriologist experts who cracked these ancient languages. So once you read those and you start putting them together, you realize that there are ancient stories that go back to the oldest recorded records we have possible on Earth. And they are able to survive because paper only lasts 500 to 1,000 years. Okay? So how are you going to record a message longer than that? Am I going to tell Daniel and hope that he tells someone else? And then what's going to happen to that based on the phone game we played as kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
By the time I tell Daniel that ancient Nineveh in Iraq, it'll be like ancient, I don't know, cinema in
the
something.
water will be very muddy. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that I realized and recognized what the earliest versions of these were, and that they contained key pieces of information about our history. And so what do they say? Well, they don't say what modern academia acknowledges, which is very strange.
Mm-hmm.
They state that there were originally 5 cities created on Earth, Eridu to Shuruppak. Shuruppak was the last city. Keep that in mind. Shuruppak is a key to this entire thing. Okay. And it's a key to how I found all this. Okay. So what I'm showing right now is basically that if you just go on Google and you look up Uruk and the rise of civilization, it'll tell you this right here. It'll say that Uruk is the first city. But why do they say that?
Mm-hmm.
None of the tablets say that. None of the tablets say Uruk was the first city. They all say Uruk was the reemergence of a much earlier age. And when I realized that, I first asked the question, well, why aren't they talking about Eridu to Shuruppak? And when they do mention it, they mention it as being a later time, like a earlier time period, younger. So I was scratching my head. I'm trying to figure out why they're doing that. And I eventually realized it's because that's the key to where all of it began. That's where we did first begin. That's when civilization was not just comes randomly out of nowhere, but they describe it as kingship being lowered from above and this ancient knowledge of Mies, M-E-S. And they talked about how the Mies are moved, and kingship and the Mies are moved between cities. And when one city they would call it, when it would fall, like the balance of it, they would move it to another city. And I was always scratching my head trying to understand that. Like, what do you mean? Like, so kingship was lowered and moved to cities? What is that? Well, what I ended up realizing was that we were talking about knowledge systems, highly advanced knowledge systems that were necessary for civilizations to flourish. And that if you did not have them, civilizations would ultimately go down the wrong road, which I firmly believe we did. And so it all began with this excavation that occurred in 1931. Penn Museum, Penn University, which we went and filmed as part of the documentary there, which I can give updates at the end for how that's all going when we get there. So the documentary starts with me going to Penn Museum, Penn Archives, with an archaeologist named Jennifer Deo. She's a Mesopotamian expert. We're there because it's the only place in the world that houses the original records from that excavation. And that excavation was that Penn University went to the deserts of Iraq in 1931 to a place called Tel Farah because they wanted to find the legendary and mythical city of Shuruppak, which we're told isn't really real. Okay. So they go out there, they're digging down. So this is an actual photograph from the excavation. And I want people to see this to understand it, because it's really important. Is that I have highlighted a red arrow on the right. That is, if you want to draw a line right across the screen from that red arrow. That is the layer called stratum number 2, which is where the time period of Uruk and Gilgamesh is. where archaeologists are telling us that civilization began. Right there. They found it because the time period of Gilgamesh and Uruk, they adopted this earlier site and they built right on top of it, just like we see all around the world. I cannot overestimate that enough. Nearly every ancient site we know of in the world, another later culture built right on top of, sometimes more than one. And you have primitive work on top and other kinds of structures. And then academia says, no, the ones at top, they built the ones in the bottom too. No, completely wrong. And that's where we're going right now. And so keeping this image up, they find Uruk, they call them stratum layer number 2. They find tablets, right? Confirms the time period of Gilgamesh, Uruk, all these ancient places. But here's what's interesting. They have a huge group of people all there excavating. And therefore there's not supposed to be any history below that. And there's not anyone that really wants to fund anyone to go look for that because there's not supposed to be anything below that, right? So 80% of the entire team leaves. They leave. They go home. Only the small core stays with some of these archaeologists, and they keep digging. Why? Well, they're looking for something that can't be acknowledged yet. They get below Uruk and they find this huge alluvial flood layer. Huge. No human remains, no sign of human occupation, evidence of a massive catastrophe that literally wiped out the ancient world. And as they dig below that, with this small little core group, they confirm and find Shuruppak. Well, how do they know it was down there? Because the tablets that were above, that were found in stratum layer number 2 with Gilgamesh, were talking about it. They knew that it was below them. And they were like, this is the ancient land where Shuruppak was, right? And they were able to confirm the names. And so they get down there, they find the layer of Shuruppak, all kinds of incredible artifacts, a 6-figure diorite hand. So mysterious. Diorite's one of the hardest stones in the world. Okay. Here you have this very bizarre artifact comes from this, that number one, how would you carve diorite? People often don't understand the hardness of stones. So not all stones are created equal. Limestone and softer stones are very easy to manipulate with regular tools, but harder stones are not. And that's based on what's called the Mohs hardness scale, right? Diamond being 10 and, mica being 1, right? Well, diorite's up at 8. It's ridiculously hard, okay? So the question is, if this is a primitive civilization, how do they make that? And more importantly, we have a civilization called Shuruppak that's acknowledged as being one of the first cities on Earth that's found way beneath Uruk, and yet academia refuses to acknowledge that it's from an earlier time period. In fact, if you read the 1931, and anyone listening to this right now, I have all this in my book, The Missing Key. All their analysis, their summaries, and you can read it right in there. And basically, they had this really interesting play on. It's a play on words, or just maybe theoretically considering something, we'll call it. And what it is this big summary part at the end, after the excavation report, when they found all this, and they're like, it's really interesting how there's a flood layer that's right above Shuruppak, which coincides exactly with tablets talking about how Shuruppak was destroyed by a flood. Every single tablet talks about that. So here we have this flood layer sitting there, an ancient city underneath it, far older than the one above. And yet at the end of this conclusion, they go, even though there's basically all these really interesting similarities, it's still probably not from that time period. We're not going to fully, basically, we're not going to jump on board on that. And they don't. And actually, if you read what we found when we went to the archive, was that the German and American teams were arguing. So this is really interesting, right? What you get is essentially these records are public online, but there's a whole series of the records that didn't get published. So imagine you have however many different versions and pages of these excavation reports, an American and a German version, okay? Only one of them gets published, but there's all this other stuff that's in the archive. That's why we went there. I knew that the answers I was looking for were in this archive, and what better way to start a journey and a documentary but in this amazing library, okay? Penn Archive is one of the coolest libraries you could ever imagine. Classic, big circular different levels with all the ancient books and wood. So we're in there and we're in these original records, right? We're looking through them. And what we found is that both teams were arguing. They didn't want to acknowledge which stratum layer was which. They were like, well, maybe it moved this over here because of a flood and it wasn't from here. They couldn't come into an agreement. Why? Because some of them were realizing exactly what I did. That Shuruppak was from another time period of history that had not been acknowledged. And that's dangerous. That's the most dangerous thing of all. So here we go. 1931 happens. This report gets published, gets very little fanfare, just kind of disappears. When I stumbled upon that 2.5 years ago, it's what led me to everything else. Because here I realized that we have an official academia set of records that is giving us the evidence to show that, oops, we kind of made a mistake here. We found something we shouldn't have, right? And so when I went down that road, I realized I didn't even understand what it was going to lead to. I'm thinking to myself, wow, I'm going to prove Shuruppak is from a lost civilization or an earlier age, but I never imagined what it would lead to. Never in a million years did I realize where that would go.
Fascinating. I mean, the whole time, again, it ties into what we spoke about before with this dogmatic approach from academia. I just don't understand why you wouldn't want to acknowledge that. It seems very flawed that you would want to acknowledge that something's older than what you initially thought.
Well, why don't you think the other way? What happens if they do? Have you thought about the ramifications for
obviously,
that?
there's the loss of funding. There's the
No, not like that.
Okay.
What about who were they? What was that civilization like? The questions that would come up would be dangerous, okay? Because they lead to answers that we are not necessarily supposed to know.
That's what I was meaning, sorry. So I think you would want to uncover more, or I certainly would, if I was in the profession. And I think the caveat with that is what I was alluding to with the funding is that as they lose that, they lose integrity, reputation. You hear many stories of archaeologists who have, most notably Robert Schoch, who have spoken out on certain things, and their reputation's tarnished within the community.
Exactly.
And then they get labelled a kook or
which is why nobody says anything. Mm-hmm. We don't have the capabilities in place. And look, I'm not going to mention names, but I am working with archaeologists, some of which do support and understand, and I'm talking about mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
I can't say who they are, but it's happening where they're recognizing what this is, which we haven't even really gone over yet, and they're quietly supporting me, but they can't support me publicly yet.
Okay.
It's happening.
So in politics, they have the Overton window, that's always shifting with what's deemed as palatable and what's left, what's right. Can we use that metaphor for potentially with academia too?
Essentially.
Okay, that's interesting.
And what we're going to see is a very big shift and a distrust in science because of this, in archaeology and these different things. And I think that this will be something that really helps us bring science back to what it's supposed to be all along. So let's go through it all, right? Let's lay this all out. Let's go through it. I don't find the Penn University finds Shuruppak. They put this paper out. Nobody cares about it anymore. It disappears, right? I find it 2.5 years ago. I realized it contains all of these keys to understanding something that we didn't understand. The first thing was that I realized that all of what we consider Sumerian tablets are not actually Sumerian. They're Neo-Akkadian. And that this civilization didn't seem to leave any writings behind, which is mind-boggling for people to consider, except when you get into the dialogues of Socrates. Socrates, do you know these? Do you know
Socrates? Yeah.
Socrates, the dialogues of Plato is that Socrates didn't want to write anything down because he believed it could be misinterpreted too easily.
Was Socrates the guy, sorry to interrupt you, coined the phrase, the more you think you know, you don't know? Is that's Socrates?
Perhaps, yeah. And so Plato disagrees with him. He writes everything down, but he does it in a super clever allegorical way. Why? Because those things weren't tolerant at that time period. In fact, if anyone would do a little history, Socrates was then murdered by his own government. He was forced to eat hemlock and he chose that as his own death, which is so sad. They're like, well, you're going to die. You can pick how you want to die. He picks hemlock, takes it. And
you're going to die. You can pick how you want. How generous.
Well, they
of them.
respected him, but because he was outspoken, he was still put to death.
Mm-hmm.
So why would we be surprised that Plato then wrote everything in allegory? You think that he's really going to not learn from that? He was devastated. Socrates was his greatest mentor of all time. He was like a father to him that he watched die. It was devastating. You can read it. You can see in his writings how devastating it was to him. So Plato is super smart. He writes everything in allegory, and then society thinks it's a myth, but it's actually all based on real ancient knowledge. Okay, on a society that existed. Remember, like more of a utopian society he talks about versus later societies after. So I have Shuruppak. I know it's from this lost time period, right? This mysterious Sumerian time period that is very, very misunderstood. Now, if you were to imagine a timeline, here is 6,000 years ago, Gilgamesh. What I'm going to be proposing is that the Sumerian time period isn't just before it, but long before it. Again, studying the tablets is, for me, and all the years that I've done this, categorizing them, organizing them, going through which ones, for instance, like if somebody was going to go, well, I want to read all the tablets. No, a lot of them are like commerce and laws and rules. They're not necessarily ancient origins and histories and stories. They're in different categories, right? So you have to try to pick out what you're interested in. And what I'm interested in particularly are real events that are mentioned in them. So I was going through all of them, and what I found is very interesting. There are only 2 tablets that exist in the world that mention the word Mies. Out of thousands, there's only 2. And so when I stumbled upon them, I realized they were incredibly important, something that had been very missed. And basically, they discuss how Gilgamesh. Are you familiar with the Gilgamesh story?
Oh, the Epic of Gilgamesh, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
so
I was watching it last night, actually.
Okay, so anybody who is, and of course, I was just in the British Museum to see the original Epic of Gilgamesh tablets. How
So in the
awesome
video,
is that to see that in
look cool.
person, right? In that story, I want people to understand there is a bunch of allegorical things with the stars and constellations, zodiacs, of course, but there's also a real journey in there. There's real truth. For instance, Gilgamesh was a tyrant king of Uruk. Well, we know Uruk was a real city. We know he was a king of it. So why do we consider that just a myth? Academia isn't even able to jump on board that as being a real story. So then what else is there? Well, Gilgamesh goes on the journey. He meets up with his companion Enkidu, which is a very interesting name. Enkidu subsequently dies. He's killed. And Gilgamesh is heartbroken. He's devastated, and he faces his own mortality. He says, "I don't want to die." He fears his own mortality.
Gilgamesh was considered a demigod, wasn't he? In
yes,
the story?
of the ruling Uruk of that time period that we consider civilization beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So he goes on this journey to go visit Ziusudra. So here we got to talk about Ziusudra. So Ziusudra, or Untapishtim in the Ladian, Assyrian, and Akkadian, he is the figure that became Noah in biblical terms. But the stories that they turned it into became kind of like a fairy tale, silly thing. They're nothing like what the original tablets really say. What they state, and I want to go through this for everybody, is that Ziusudra's father was his name was Ubaratutu, and they were the last rulers of Shuruppak. They were ancient kings and high priests. And you have this ancient city, and basically their patron god Enki. Enki is one of the pantheon of ancient Mesopotamian gods, right? We call the Anun or Anunnaki. Whole conversation in itself. There's a whole pact in a deal that's made by the great Anuna where they want to create a catastrophe on the earth to destroy all of humanity. They call us being too noisy, too loud. That's what they say. And they want to reset the whole thing. So they make a pact where none of the gods are supposed to warn any humans at all. And yet Enki creatively through a reed bed, okay, reeds like in a wetland, he speaks to him through like a reed bed or a wall. It's just different translations for it. So he kind of like tricking to say he didn't really say it because he's like speaking through something else. And what he does is he warns only one person at all, everywhere. He warns Ziusudra, because Ziusudra is not just a regular king, but he's a great mystic initiate of deep knowledge, okay? He's like a high priest of deep knowledge. And he has more knowledge than pretty much anyone that exists at that time. He has all the knowledge of what became known as the Mies, the higher knowledge of above and below, the necessary components for civilization and everything. Okay, so he's warned of this catastrophe, right? A huge flood. And he's told to build this massive cedar craft and use bitumen to seal it and bring in just his animals to survive and his family, his 3 sons, okay, and his wife. And they're supposed to enter this in that the world is basically going to come to an end. And they have to seal it because it's such an absolute catastrophe that there's rain, there's massive, it's waves. It's like the end of the world. Now, that event might seem crazy on the surface until you get into looking at ice cores and different climatic events of our ancient history and what has happened. And it starts to really make sense. But we're not going to go down that road yet. We're going to lay this out first, and we can get into dating and getting into all that stuff, okay? So he's warned of this catastrophe. They board this craft and they land somewhere. Now everybody knows where they land, and we can get confirmation of where they land. Again, where I just was, the British Museum, they have the original tablets called the Babylonian Map of the World, the oldest single map that exists in humanity. And in that map, I want to tell the story, is that they have the known Babylonian world in the center, and there are triangles that emanate out of each side. Now, one of those triangles was misplaced when it was first found. It was in the wrong area. And an intern in the 90s was working in the British Museum with Irving Finkel. Love Irving Finkel. And she identified that it was supposed to be part of the Babylonian map of the world. So when they fit it in, it was like a Rosetta Stone to uncover all of it because they didn't understand what all of it meant because they were missing a critical piece. So they fit that in, it connects the whole thing, and they realize it's an ancient map of the world, right? And that it was pointing, one of the particular triangles was pointing towards Ararat or Urartu, they called it, as being the location where the famous story of Ziusudra, where he landed. Now, when I found all that and I'm studying the tablets, I'm enamored by this story, okay? But before we head to Ararat, I want to go over what the Mies are really quick. He basically says, Lord Billigames, having erected stelae for years, you have come to the abode of Ziusudra, and you brought back with you the Mies of Sumer that had been lost forever. The Mies of Sumer. Now, when I found this tablet, I realized it contained so many secrets because not only does it say that Sumer was from a completely different time period as Gilgamesh, but they're talking about these Mies. And I didn't understand what they were at first. It's like, what are the Mies? So as I said, the Mies are only mentioned in 2 tablets out of thousands. The rest were broken and lost. And keep in mind, these are ancient. These are thousands of years old, found in Nineveh in the ancient Ashurbanipal library. And Ashurbanipal was an Assyrian king and a high priest who recognized how important and sacred these are and went all throughout the region to amass this together into the first library in the world that we still have, that we have records of, that we've found. And he brought it all together. And even, for instance, H.G. Wells, famous writer, he called this library the greatest, the most precious source of historical material in the world. And yet most people have never heard of it. They've heard of the Library of Alexandria. But here we have this giant cuneiform library, and these tablets are within it. You had this Death of Gilgamesh tablet, Gilgamesh, his 2 different names. And that mentions these Mies and that they were from a much earlier time period in history. And then you have another tablet called Enki and the World Order. And in that, Enki and Inanna, these ancient Anuna gods, are divvying out regions realms of the world they want to rule over, regions, right? And she's talking about in that how she knows the Mies and what they are and knows the laws of heaven and earth. They call them the laws of heaven and earth, not commandments and rights. That was unfortunately mistranslated by Samuel Noah Kramer in the Death of Gilgamesh. They didn't understand what they were either. So they're doing their best to try to translate these things, okay? So Samuel Kramer writes that he thinks the Mies are commandments and rights. They're not commandments and rights. They're trying to come from like an ancient kingship type of mentality of what we consider kingship now. But Enki and the World Order translated it correctly. They're not commandments and rights. They're divine laws and statutes of heaven and earth. So what does that mean? So mysterious, right? What kind of knowledge? Well, the knowledge of everything. And that is what we're about to get into. And so going back to where we were, Babylonian map of the world, all these tablets, the stories, they all say the same thing. Ziusudra lands this craft in the region of Ararat Mountains in eastern Turkey, what was ancient Armenia. Then the tablets talk about how the gods descend down from the heavens. Enlil's furious. He said, no man is supposed to survive the catastrophe. Enki says, I warned him to protect the seed of knowledge. Now, I originally thought the seed of knowledge was genetics. I don't think it was, because one man can't repopulate the world. Seed of knowledge was actually the Mies. It was the laws of heaven and earth, the knowledge of everything, how the universe functions, how society has to be created, how to live in balance and harmony with everything, what we are, what we're a part of, all of these necessary things to create a perfect civilization. So in the tablets, Gilgamesh goes to Ziusudra, and remember, he gets the Mies back, brings them back to him, to the world we're in now. He loses them. He becomes obsessed with his own immortality. This knowledge gets fragmented off into certain groups that want to use it and control it, and it gets largely lost, okay? Then history goes forward, and most archaeologists, most experts, or whoever is involved in this, maybe believe that it's gone. Well, not so fast. The ancient world was a lot more sophisticated and advanced in their mindsets than we would have imagined. So here we are in the tablets. The tablets end with Ziusudra being in this region, the Ararat region, which is in eastern Turkey. And all of the information that comes after is basically broken off of these tablets, and we have no idea what happens ever again. It's really wild. It's like having a story. You can go all the way up to a certain point, and then you don't have any more information. It's like, what happened to Ziusudra? Well, the only thing we know before they fragment off is that Ziusudra is rewarded by Enlil because he preserved this knowledge base of everything. And so what he does is he rewards him by giving him, he's the last mortal to ever be given immortality, ever. And immortality requires him existing in the underworld, though, because nothing in the physical world can live forever. Nothing. Anything in the physical world will die eventually. That's just part of the cycles of life. So he is giving this, we would call it an abode in the underworld, a realm of reality to exist in for all of eternity, which means he's there right now. As we're talking, he's listening to this conversation of this.
I hope he's subscribed.
No, but seriously though, he's in the underworld, and that's where Gilgamesh goes. This is what people don't often understand, is that you ever seen the Greek depictions of Cher and the boatman that ferries people across the underworld, right? Mm-hmm. That came from the Epic of Gilgamesh. So it describes Gilgamesh going into this mysterious metaphysical world where he's ferried across to the underworld to visit Ziusudra, in which Ziusudra then tells him all the history of ancient Shuruppak being far older than his time period, and that the Mies, this ancient knowledge system, was once known here and was lost forever. He uses the term Shuruppak and Uruk are so distant in their time that he calls it forever. And he probably should have, because we're talking about well over 20,000 years difference.
Wow.
We're talking about an enormous time period gap. So that's all we know. From that point on, the tablets fragment, break. Atrahasis, Epic of Gilgamesh. There's no more information. And if people are wondering why, it's because these tablets went through wars. They were destroyed often. What we're talking about is crumbled pieces we're trying to fit together. When you're reading through them, there'll be lines missing, right? It's not like this is just all there. We only have fragments and pieces of it left. So I say all that because that actually is just the primer for everything that came after. It's just the beginning. That was when I realized there's something very real here. there was a real story. There was a lineage, there was a legacy that had happened here. So I start studying based on the Babylonian map of the world in that region. I start studying the region because I'm like, there's got to be other evidence of where this went, right? There's no way that this just disappeared. That's when I stumbled upon the Van region of Turkey. This is far eastern Turkey, not near Göbekli Tepe or western Turkey. It's in what I consider like the Wild West of archaeology. There's no tourism, very little tourism. In fact, I'm bringing more tourism than there pretty much has ever been there right now. I actually lead tours there if anybody's interested in finding, like, actually being a part of lost history, in which we've actually found artifacts that are from literally the oldest civilization known. And we've been able to give them back to the museum there. So I'm studying this region. I stumble upon all these sites around Lake Van. Lake Van is the largest soda lake in the world, meaning no outlet. It's a single closed basin, ancient lake, one of the oldest lakes on earth, surrounded by volcanoes, the Taurus Mountains, beautiful place, right? Tourism doesn't even know about it yet. It's not a dangerous place, but it also is a place where archaeological sites have almost no ropes. There's no infrastructure. It literally is like the Wild West. If people want to think that world doesn't exist anymore, it does. And it's been an honor to be a part of it. And since then, I've been to that region 5 times to explore these sites. And the sites are Shavuz Tepe. Can you pull up the Shavuz Tepe image really quick? Shavuz Tepe, Ionis, Kefkalesi, these underwater ruins. And there's other sites around it as well that are mysterious, that have massive megalithic stones and these symbols carved into them, and these temples that are made with stonework that looks like it was created yesterday. Edges so sharp you could nearly almost cut your finger on them. We're talking about ancient megalithic masonry that is beyond comprehension. This is what's called Shavuz Tepe. Now you have the limestone walls of the Urartians, but there's something else there. There's evidence of something far older. And in situ in the grass, like you're seeing right there, no fences, nothing, completely ignored, are these clues to everything. Literally these keys to everything. And the reason they haven't been acknowledged is that archaeologists believe that the Urartians built all these sites around Van. And they built them 2,800 years ago. And when you're trying to get funding or interest in a culture that's 2,800 years ago, that's Iron Age, it's not particularly interesting to a lot of people. It's not like ancient Egypt. It's not quite the same thing. And so there was very little interest. And why do they think that? Because the Urartians used cuneiform writing to put into structures and try to claim ownership for them. This created a headache with archaeologists. They took that with face value, that they created both. Like these highly precise megalithic work. Can you pull up Ionis? Ayanis? All of these incredible things are sitting beneath this very primitive mud brick and crude limestone sometimes, and they're considering them built by the same culture. Why? Because they claim ownership of them and said they built them. Well, I'm there looking at the sites, and I've studied what we call lost civilization evidence around the world. These incredibly precise stonework that is massive on a scale we can't even comprehend, where we don't even know how they built them, right? Here's a great example, right? So here's Ionis. The stone you're seeing is called andesite. It's like a 7 on the most, 7 to a 7.5 on the most hardness scale, up to an 8. It's incredibly hard, and yet they have these precise laser cut symbols all over the place, including in the back, you can see is like the origin of the sun cross. All these really mysterious things. Now, if you look in the back, it looks like dirt. It's not actually dirt, it's eroded mud brick. The Urartians had built a castle on top of this, and they incorporated into their war culture. They were fighting the Assyrians and the Babylonian and Medes cultures. There was all kinds of wars going on, so they were a war culture. So they imagine them adopting incredibly sacred sites that had nothing to do with war, changing around the gods to be different than they're supposed to be as sun war gods, like literally converting a god of knowledge into being a war god. That's what they were doing. And then dismantling temples, and then basically building castles on top and pretending like they're the ones who built these incredible things. So disrespectful. And for anyone who thinks that that's only an isolated case, wait till we get to Egypt. The dynastic Egyptians did pretty terrible things as well. The Sphinx is the best example of that. So I'm there, I'm recognizing something here that is not Urartian, 100%. And I'm finding anomalies in the stones that show that the original stones had nothing written in them. Certain pieces of damage that had existed in them, they wrote around. Where if you had capabilities to build stonework in the most sacred temple, you would never use damaged stones. You would refit them, you would get new ones. But no, here we have noticeable damage, huge weathering pieces of damage that they had to write around, meaning that the damage had existed before the writing. Now, that was just the beginning of it, though. That's not enough to prove anything. So I then knew there was something big here, but I didn't know what it was. So I put a whole team together around the world. We go from Penn Museum Archive to experts like Dr. Robert Schoch, right? And multiple archaeologists like Hans Orheim and Omer Tanyurek. They all join the team. I have 10 team members. We all descend on Von, right? We explore these sites and we're looking at all these symbols, and we have all these mysterious symbols that keep popping up and repeating all over the place. And I'm being told, it's Urartian. What are you doing? Oh, that's fun that you're doing this, but it's Urartian. And I'm thinking to myself, and we're talking about a lot of pressure. You know, you meet up with archaeologists and they kind of smile. They're like, it's Urartian. Not so fast. So we film all around Von. We're finding all of these ancient symbols, and we're finding all this incredible stonework, all these amazing reliefs, like the Kef Ba relief.
Well, we'll go into the bit where you said you was assembling a team. So they can subscribe to what you was telling them, I take it. Because to try and convince, one might think to try and convince archaeologists, I should say.
I don't want to put any, I'm not going to say that experts like, yeah, it's good, it's fine. So that relief right there is found from Von. It's called the Kef Ba relief. There's more than one of those. In fact, the artifact we found in the field with my tour was part of that. And there's more than one of them. And it was such an honor to give that back. That relief is massive. It's as big as you to me. Mm-hmm. It's huge. And it's made out of basalt. It's a very hard stone. And the work that with multiple levels and everything that's been built there is beyond comprehension. We have no idea how they made this, first of all. Now, when I started to see that the symbols that were present at Ionis and present at Kef and Chavus Tepe were carrying over and all repeating, I realized there was something bigger here. And then it led to the whole underwater ruins under Lake Von, which are now the deepest confirmed underwater ruins that ever been found in the world, in which we were among the first to dive and photograph. In fact, we were the first ever in history to be able to photograph Ionis. Nobody's ever filmed it. Oh. So this documentary is groundbreaking even in itself for that. We were able to film all these places, and I'm very lucky and very grateful to have those connections and be able to do that and show the world these places that they've largely never heard of. So as I was showing you those pictures and those sites, all these symbols are repeating all over the place. There's a step pyramid. There's these 3 doorways, 3 levels. It's 3, 3, 3, 3, 3 everywhere. Everything is 3. Okay. It's like a code, 3, 6, and 9. It's like a binary code for them, but not binary. And everything was symmetrical. Everything was mirrored. Everything was repeating. And as for me, as someone who's studied ancient Hermeticism, I'm an initiate of mystery schools, which is like the ancient knowledge system of antiquity, like they used to have. I saw a lot of these repeating symbols, and I recognized that there were similarities with Hermeticism, but I didn't really understand where that was going to go. I was under the theory that Hermeticism was just knowledge that had been passed down from this, but I couldn't prove it. So we have all that. We film all these amazing locations. We're finding evidence of vitrification, which is like plasma-induced melting of stone, right? Showing from an ancient catastrophe. We confirm that with Dr. Robert Schoch. So if anyone's wondering, we were able to confirm vitrification on these stones that are ancient stones with the reliefs on them that has shown that a plasma event, some kind of a massive event from that time period, probably the younger Dryas or older Dryas, literally was so intense that it actually melted these stones. So for anyone wondering, you would need like 2,000 degrees in Fahrenheit to be able to do that. Unbelievable, like scorching the earth. Just evidence of catastrophes during a certain time period, and that these likely predated those catastrophes, right? So we filmed all throughout Turkey. And as I'm studying these symbols, this is where it starts getting really exciting. So we're told that ancient civilizations had really no contact cross-continentally with each other, meaning multiple continents all sharing information, sharing knowledge. So I start noticing through my research that these symbols are being repeated in other parts of the world, which is not supposed to exist, right? First of all, they believe that it's Urartian 2,000 years ago, which it's absolutely not. It's obviously far older. But not only that, but the same symbols as this core set of symbols, not random. They were repeating all over the world. Now, this image that's up this is from Ollantaytambo in Peru. And it's an area that not everybody goes to. It's a spring called the Spring of the Nusta. And the Nusta is like a Incan high priestess. More of like a sacred, divine, feminine kind of energy. And Ollantaytambo is built there because of this spring. It's a very sacred spring water source for them that flows through. They literally redirect the spring to flow over that basalt bedrock and then carve that symbol into it and have it flow over the top of it. Unbelievably sophisticated to do that. Now, the first thing you notice is that the step pyramid is like identical to the step pyramid on the Kef bas relief. And it has 3 levels inside, 3, 3, 3, 3 steps, and it has water flowing right over the top of it. So if you're trying to imagine what the ancient people would revere the sacredness of spring water and giving all of life, right? And here they have it flowing over this incredibly important symbol. But we didn't know what it meant yet. So we get the whole team together. We go to Peru. We film all these sites.
But just a side note on that previous slide as well. Those who know geography well, Peru and Turkey are
6,000 miles away.
Exactly. So you're seeing similarities, anomalies that are both in Turkey and Peru, and I'm sure we're going to get to other places too, that are quite a extensive distance
Exactly.
away. Okay.
Yeah, like we're talking about across the world, and it seems like an impossibility. Now, that's not enough, though. That's not enough to prove lost civilizations. Now, that wasn't the only place in Peru. You go to places like, there's also Napan Glacier, and there's the parts of the Coricancha, and then there's, of course, other parts of Peru that have these symbols all over them. And if anybody knows that if you combine the 3-level step pyramid with the inverted and non-inverted, it creates what's called the Chicana, which is the most important symbol in South America. Well, now we're finding the origins of the Chicana doesn't even originate there, that it's from something older. Now, how would you know that? When symbols are first created, when knowledge is first created, it always becomes more advanced over time and not less. So you would want to find the proto-origins of those symbols. And as you see how much more complex they get around the world, you know that Van was the origin. Of course, that's where Ziusudra was, all this mysterious lowering of knowledge, right? The whole story. And so we film all throughout Peru. We're looking at all these incredible, massive stonework. At Ollantaytambo, you have blocks of granite and diorite that are over 50 tons. A ton is 2,000 pounds. We're talking about capability to cut and move these stones that we have no comprehension of today. No comprehension of. We don't even know how they did it. So here's a great comparison to show people what we're talking about. We're not talking about primitive stonework. Highly advanced, some of the most important stonework in the world. And so you can see some of the comparisons. Basically, on the left side, that's Ollantaytambo. Look at the stonework. That's the same place that previous image I showed you is located. And then in the middle, you have Ionis and these basalt walls that are like almost identical. And if you on the right is the Coricancha. We're looking at a shared building style, a shared understanding that was cross-continental, which has never been acknowledged at all by any mainstream archaeologist. There was something here that was not primitive, not from the Inca, not from the Urartians. There was something much older. That there was the telltale sign. Now, why is that stuff often ignored? Because people are told that if something is old, it has to be primitive. So when they look at stonework like that, they're like, that's not old. No, it's older than everything else. That's the whole point, is that there's a signature that this civilization had. They built only in certain ways. Giant stones. perfectly fitted, knobs sticking out, mysteries about how they built them, why they built them. All of this stuff carries over, right? We see all this in Peru, and we see the same thing in Bolivia too. So here we go to Lake Titicaca, we go to Pumapunku and Tiwanaku, and then we find the same symbols repeating but combined together, getting more advanced over time, not less. And what they're doing is they essentially took the door, the T, and the inverted step pyramid, put them all together in the same symbol. And I was blown away by this. Seeing this in the field, and of course you can see Dr. Robert Schock there and archaeologist Hans Orheim, and we're basically standing next to these symbols that are becoming more advanced over time, and they're carrying over around the world. And so we figured that out, that there's something going on here, but we don't know what it is. And we film in Bolivia, we film in Peru, we film in Vaughan, and then we go all the way across the world to Cambodia. Now we're talking about something that is in the jungles of Asia. And in that location, I found within Angkor Wat and Angkor Thom, the largest ancient set of ruins in the world, complex. But within that giant Khmer Empire, there's something older that exists. Very select, smaller temple areas that are not part of the main ones, that don't share the same symbols. And there, as we're going through the jungle, even in places off the beaten path from tourists, temples that are all overgrown and collapsed, we find some amazing things. So this is a site called Bapwan, and it's got a beautiful, ancient temple sitting in the center, but off to the side is this older part of the complex. And when we went down in there, not only did we find the step pyramids above the doorway, the same symbols we've been following, the 3-level step pyramids, but we found these really mysterious miniature monolithic temples. Miniature. Meaning they looked exactly like the larger versions. They had carved all these little miniature temples there. And we're scratching our heads trying to figure it out. And the image on the right is actually from Vaughan, and there are miniature versions of these smaller temples as well. So we're in these sites, we're seeing these tiny and then bigger and bigger versions of all these places. And of course, if anyone's wondering, that's what's called fractal geometry. So fractal geometry is this idea that you build something small that represents something bigger and you just mimic it over and over again. But that didn't really give us answers to anything. So we filmed 6 countries, go all around the world, right? We find what I thought was pretty important evidence of at least trying to prove a lost civilization and some kind of patterns or symbols that were being carried over, right? But that's all we knew. That's all we knew. And we were preparing to finish the documentary. It was going to be out soon, on Netflix. We were going to get this thing out to the world. And then something huge happened. And that none of us expected. And I was in the middle of writing The Missing Key. We were about to do post-production. And so going forward, this is many months later, I am in my snowy cabin in northern Michigan. It's a beautiful place. It's snowing outside as it did every day. Which, by the way, we had over 5.5 meters of snow this year.
Oh, wow.
Absolutely incredible, right? Okay, so this image is, it's such a crazy story. It's really hard for people to wrap their heads around this story. And it is for me too, to be honest. So that photograph on the top left that I'm holding, I bought that 8 years ago in a yard sale. Way before I did really any of this. I was living in Maine at the time. And it's funny because if you watch old videos of me, you'll see it behind me all over the place. It's literally just a junky plastic frame, costs $4. It's just this generic looking picture.
You just got it because you like
oh,
to
no, that's cool.
Like
if I have this,
it is a cool photo. There's
I loved history and it spoke to me. It's like, oh, you should get this. So I got it and I listened to my intuition. And so I hang it everywhere I go. I literally travel and I relocate from New Hampshire, Maine, Colorado, California, Michigan. I literally bring it everywhere I go. It's hanging everywhere. It's not like in some, drawer somewhere that it's always there. I looked at it hundreds of times, never really noticed anything. Like, whatever. I'm standing there watching the snow, and I had this really weird sort of intuition voice come over me. It's like, look at the picture. And I kind of rejected it and sort of like, I looked at that a million times. And it was just such a funny, interesting moment. And it came in again. And look, I am very sane, very mentally balanced person. But I do understand that reality is more complex than we understand. So same thing again. Look at the picture. It was like a thought or intention. And I was like, okay, I'll do it. Because I listened, I'm always in intuition and flow. I firmly believe in that. And everybody else listening to that, I would encourage you to do that as well. So I get up and I'm just like, even though I've looked at this thing for years and it's been there, there's this really funny principle in psychology called the invisible gorilla. Is that if you're not looking for something, you often won't even see it. And that they use the analogy of the funny, a giant gorilla in a room that you walk in and you don't even see it in there because you would never imagine to find a gorilla in a room before, right? Just something that's crazy to be in there. Well, this sort of followed that principle because as I'm looking at it, I don't see anything. And it's like my eyes had to retrain themselves. I'd follow the symbols around the world, but I had never even looked at what right in front of me, what could have contained something. And there, right in front of me, was what looked like an inverted, broken step pyramid. And I was intrigued. First of all, how common is this? I've never seen this before. This is the Giza Plateau. This is the most studied archaeological area in the world, right? Millions of visitors, everyone's walking around. There's no way that the secret to all of this would be there. There's no way. So I'm doing a little research. I'm trying to do reverse searches. I'm trying to find out where this is. Can't find a single other image of it anywhere at all. It almost doesn't exist. So I call Dr. Robert Schoch because he has a lot of experience in the area. And I find out that it's from what's called the Sphinx Temple. Now, the Sphinx Temple is one of, if not the only off-limits main areas in all of the Giza Plateau. You can only go there if you have a special permit or you get special access. There literally are gates if you walk by that close it off. So if anybody listening to this has ever been to the Valley Temple, you've walked by the Sphinx Temple, but you can't get in, okay? So I asked Robert Schoch and Mohammed Ibrahim, who's an Egyptologist that works with Dr. Robert Schoch. They worked in the Sphinx Temple over 20 years ago, studying it. They had never seen it. They were like, what is that, right? That's interesting. So I was mystified. Like, there's no way this frame picture is the only picture of this. So I do AI reverse searches. I search everything. I'm a research hound, okay? I couldn't find a single other image anywhere that existed. Now, I have had one person come forward that showed me some passing little video from someone that's been in there, but it was really even hard to even notice, right? But largely, it's this really mysterious, strange thing. Here you have this off-limits location where seemingly nobody's taken a picture from this angle, except for this one photograph.
So do you know this? You bought this from a yard sale, so you have no idea of who took that
No
photo.
idea who the photographer was.
Okay.
But the fact that there you go. The fact that this is one of the only pictures to show this symbol is bizarre. Okay. And that it's in this closed off area. So that's not enough to get anyone. They could say that it looks like that. It's just, no, it's not enough. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to find more because I'm intrigued, right? So I do something that surprisingly most people have not done, including a lot of archaeologists. I pull up the temple layouts. So if you imagine when they first uncovered a temple and found it, they would mark where everything is. Like, what are the designs? How is the layout? And they would create a layout like a housing plan or like a city plan, right? So they made these way back, years and years and years and years ago when they first found these sites. But they weren't looking for the symbols I'm looking for. Nobody was. And there, I literally almost had a heart attack because there I saw this, not only the step pyramid, inverted and non-inverted, but the T designed into the temple layouts themselves. So the stone, what we call like a cipher stone, it was pointing towards something far greater, something far more important. And it was an entire knowledge system encoded into these temples. Now, when I talked to Dr. Robert Schoch about this, I love that he gave this great quote where he says, it's one thing to argue symbols and stones around the world as being a coincidence. But when you have those entire symbols carved into the layouts themselves, it becomes impossible to ignore. Dr. Robert Schoch, I send all my data to him. I say, can you look into this and see what you can find? I want your opinion on this. And I was expecting to get pushback. Dr. Robert Schoch is one of the most studied humans on this earth in terms of ancient history. He does not accept things unless evidence is over the top. He really, dots his I's and crosses his T's. So I knew that if I was going to get a massive theory by anyone, it would be him. And to be very clear, him on the team is as an objective explorer, not necessarily has to agree with everything that we're saying. Okay, I want to be clear that he's his own independent researcher. About half a day goes by. I didn't hear anything. I get this email. It's like a 1 paragraph thing. No pushback, no questions. No, it's just, hey, Matt, it appears that the same designs are in the second pyramid, which, Khafre's pyramid, they call it, into the mortuary entry temples and the layouts. So I was like, oh my God, the Great Pyramids are connected. So I then went to the Great Pyramid Mortuary Temple and Menkaur's Pyramid Mortuary Temple. All of them, same designs woven in. T's, step pyramids, it's all in the layout. So now we're linking not only the Valley Temple, not only the Sphinx Temple, but the Great Pyramids, and then now the Sphinx. The Sphinx is right involved in that entire thing. So if anybody knows, you brought up before, Dr. Robert Schoch pioneered in the 90s, being the first one there with John Anthony West, who brought him there to disprove that it was wind erosion on the Sphinx enclosure, not water. And he took 5 minutes, famously, not even 5 minutes, to see that it was clearly water erosion.
120 seconds, I think it was.
It was like like that, because he's one of the best trained geologists in the world. And the problem is that during dynastic times there was no rain, so there's no way you could get water erosion on anything. It had to be from an earlier time. So he already has so much of his heart in this, right? And here we are surrounding this area and finding these anomalies. Now, I was shocked, no pun intended.
Nicely done.
Because I was looking at all of these and finding this pattern all around the world that was now in these layouts. And I was like, what does it mean? I didn't understand at the time. Let me just briefly go over some of these first before I go into what they are. So I started a hunt. I realized that this ancient architecture and these symbols was in certain layouts of only older structures. Be very clear about that, not newer things. And so I started to go on a hunt. I created a movement online called Citizen Archaeology, and other people started finding these temple layouts in other places like Persepolis, Iran, and India. And the India one was one of the ones I found, but I want to go through this one first, is that hundreds of miles away, south of the Giza Plateau, is the famous Temple of Horus in Edfu, right? It's an amazing place. And when I looked at that temple layout, I was like, oh my God. All the T's are designed in as a fractal, larger to smaller. For each entrance is a T. And then all the step pyramids and the doorways are literally combined into all the architecture. They're designing all the temples to mimic this into them, okay? But that's just Egypt. Now let's go to India. And in India, you have what's called Kailasa Temple. It's part of an area called Ellora Caves. And it's the single largest monolithic temple in the world, in which they literally took a mountain that was basalt, a volcanic, very hard stone. And you'll see repeating themes here of the same stones they're using everywhere. Kailasa Temple, arguably one of the most incredible ancient structures in the world. The last place you would find this connection necessarily, because people wouldn't often necessarily connect Egypt and India, right? So as I'm looking at the temple layouts for Kailasa, I couldn't believe what I found. In the center, so imagine all of Kailasa in the very center, in the heart of it, has the same set of symbols from Tiwanaku in Bolivia, the combined, like literally identical together, all in the same place. And I was mystified. I couldn't believe that here we have the same signature present literally all around the ancient world. And not only that, but if you look at that image, there are steps all over the place, but the ones that go into that area I've highlighted is the only 3-level step staircase. So you get this theme over and over again of everything. So this is the last layout one before we get into what these are, because I want people to see ample evidence for this and examples of this. So in Tiwanaku, that picture on the right is a giant stone. I showed it earlier with Dr. Robert Schock and I. It's embedded into the rock. Hans Orheim and Dr. Robert Schock found this connection. They realized that if you look at the temple layouts, the same exact design was then designed into the entire temple too. You see that? So that would be a massive pyramidal like structure where it's a flat, basically a flat rock ground level, which has that design around all the corners. Okay, and this is what I would call in the archaeological world a home run. I've now realized that there's these repeating things you look for. That if those ancient stones have these symbols and it's in the layout, it's game over. So it started to pop up over and over and over again everywhere that was the case. And so what was all this? So now that everybody's seen this, undeniable around the world that these symbols are crossing over 3 continents in all these sites embedded into stones and temple layouts, all this stuff, right? I was trying to understand what it is. What does that do though? So at that point, where are you? You're like, well, they're designing these symbols into the temple layouts.
Like
why?
you've got the full jigsaw, but you're missing a few pieces.
Why
now.
though? Right? Like, why do that? Why put them into the temple layouts and then carve them the stones? Why bring them around the world? I knew it was special, but it wasn't until I uncovered this very, very forgotten, nearly lost term. In the book, I talk about it being the word itself that unlocked all of this was a single word that was I call it in the book, I say, so it was on the very edge of oblivion because it was barely spoken anywhere in the world anymore. It was very fringe. It was like just in Hermetic, ancient geometric designs, and it was being used very, very selectively in certain ancient sites, but it wasn't anything that was really well known. It was almost so obscure that it was about to disappear. The word itself is cosmogram. So remember that, because when I found that, it was like a complete domino effect cascade. Everything cascaded from that point, because what cosmograms are is they're a geometric structural design they're a geometric design that represents the structure of the universe. So I read that and I'm like, wait, they were designing the structure of the universe into their temples? Right? Like mind blowing. What do you mean? That's so far beyond anything we're told, right? And we're talking about how would they even know that? So I'm looking at this mystified, absolutely blown away and it's starting to dawn on me. I'm like, I always knew that these lost civilizations knew a lot more knowledge than we did. So I was aware of that. So then what I did is I then am trying to understand, well, what does that mean? So if it's the 3-level step pyramid is a cosmogram, what is it trying to show? Well, ancient traditions around the world, especially Egypt, did carry on that knowledge into their later cultures. In fact, I would say the dynastic Egyptians, besides what they did to the Sphinx, they did carry on knowledge very well into their culture. And they understood reality in ways that we don't. They understood reality as only 3 parts, just like every other ancient culture around the world. And you would know this through religions as things like the Holy Trinity and others. Like, for instance, they would consider it like the mind, the body, and the spirit, or,
mind, body, and soul.
Yeah, all that stuff. So they recognized that the universe was made up of 3 parts too. That it was basically physical reality manifested, which is what this is. And then there was 2 metaphysical realms of reality that we largely can't access. We can, but it's not easy. Things like deep meditation, psychedelics, certain temples. People that take, and I haven't done it, but people that, take high levels of DMT will see geometric designs and all these things, and it's like another realm of reality. It's mysterious, right? Well, they understood that all reality was like a sandwich or a hamburger, and physical reality is right in the center. And above, you have a celestial realm, not space. It's a metaphysical, non-physical realm. And then beneath it its mirror, because it's a mirror below, is the underworld, or what religion turned into a hell. So it really makes a lot of sense for people, right? Heaven, earth, and hell. But they're not that at all. There is no hell. That was actually demonized and inverted to basically block us off from it. Because it's not evil at all. It's not what we've been told. So when I understood that, I then see the 3 doors. And you can imagine the 3-level step pyramid is that. Like the top level would be the middle physical reality, and then the 2 on each side would be the metaphysical supporting realities. So they were showing the structure of the universe in these temple layouts. They understood things we don't today. And then not only that, but they were recognizing that the same design that was woven into us is the same design woven into the universe. Like we're made up of 3 parts, and it largely follows the same 3 parts that are echoed everywhere in the universe. So I am, at this point, basically my jaw is just open, and I'm like, what did I just find? Like, what is this? We're now 1,000 miles past lost civilizations. We're into them not only existing, but having knowledge systems and understandings that's beyond our comprehension. Okay? So do you want to get into that, or do you want to get into dating? Because there's we're at this point in this part of the discovery, we're at a crossroads where, well, how do we prove the dating and understand all the dating and when this came from? But also, what is all this knowledge? How does it connect to further? How did this code connect? And so that's essentially where this went. It went 2 different directions, where I had to first prove how old the civilization was. Then I had to try to crack this code. What did everything mean? So that is essentially where these roads went down.
Well, I think we've got about 60 minutes left. So I think let's the dating, we can maybe get that confirmed.
Okay.
But certainly we've unpacked this. You've put everything up and give us, I think it'd be unfair to the listeners if we don't identify what your theory and hypothesis is about it.
I only say that because people often will roll their eyes or not be able to continue unless they have proof of dating. Mm-hmm. So that's the only reason I say that. So I guess we can do dating after. Okay. So, but understand we have some really good data for dating for this and for creating a new timeline of when these events occurred. So I'll start out by saying I believe this civilization is 40,000 years old. And that the Sumerian Ziusudra story is older than that. How old? We don't know. I'm not able to get any dating older than that. I don't know how long the Sumerian civilization existed, but they predate that because Ziusudra seems to be the catalyst for where this all began. And I do firmly believe and can prove that it all began with Ionis, mm-hmm. where Ionis represents something very sacred that happened there, where imagine you were going to create a golden age. Well, what would you need for that? Well, you would need all the knowledge of how to be living in balance and harmony and how to create all these things and your understanding of the universe, right? You'd have to have the philosophies and all the natural law understandings. And it's very clear now, and as we're going to go and we'll see that they did have that. So I'm trying to piece this together. And the way that I'm able to do it is a combination of the knowledge left behind at these sites and ancient traditions and understandings carried down from them. Imagine you know how mathematical principles work. So if you have a mathematical principle, if you incorporate the wrong numbers into that, it won't work, right? Mm-hmm. Same thing with this. So if you try to associate the wrong values to things, it won't mirror, there won't be symmetry. It's not as hard to understand these as you think if you know the mentality of what they were doing. And you have knowledge behind that can basically fill in some gaps. So as I said, the reason I was able to find this is that it's all based on ancient mystery school Hermeticism concepts. Basically the oldest knowledge systems that exist. And now, if anyone's wondering who Hermes is the knowledge bringer of ancient Greece. And he is basically the equivalent of Thoth in ancient Egypt. They're knowledge bringers. That's what they do. And the knowledge of Hermeticism, it's called, was a continuation and carry down of all of this knowledge. Now, I knew there was a connection, but what I was missing was I had to try to figure out the doors. Which door is which? What do the rest of these symbols mean? So I pull up the Kef bas-relief. I pull up the ancient Egyptian understandings of using the sun, the rise of the sun for rebirth and the death of the sun, the west, as death, right? And the underworld is where death is. So, and then the right door, represents celestial. So when I put it all together, it all started to come together. I realized that the Kef bas-relief and these ancient Egyptian traditions actually had enough knowledge for us to figure out what all this meant again. And that was where I was able to realize that the middle door, and the reason why it's always focused, and the most important thing is that it's physical reality, meaning that both metaphysical realities support manifestation of this reality. They're not outside it. Everything is functioning in this perfect system, okay, that exists in the universe. And based on that understanding of the Kef bas-relief, what you're seeing there is the god, or the winged god on the left. His name is Nergal. Now, that is not what archaeologists are going to tell you, because the Urartians changed their pantheon around to turn them into war celestial solar gods, which they never were. The gods that are associated with what you're seeing in front of you are underworld gods, but they also mirror the above. Okay, so when you look at that, you know that Nergal on the left is the god of death and destruction. His counterpoint in the underworld is the positive balance, is Enki. Everybody knows Enki, right? I just told you the story about warning Ziusudra. Where do you think Ziusudra went with immortality? In the underworld, okay? Now, when you take the middle door concept as the tree of life and you use it as a metaphor for also consciousness and humanity, and that there is no separation between that, you then start to piece all this together. You see this concept of 3 doors that's echoed all around the world, not only in ancient structures, but even in paintings like The Last Supper with Da Vinci, which we'll get into in a minute. So, got the doors down, right? Left door is, and I'm sure everyone can realize, you also have positive, negative, you have death and life. It all reflects that, right? I think people could probably understand that if you try to fit, like, for instance, the underworld in the right door, it just won't work. It'll all break, right? You have to fit everything and associate it correctly, or nothing else will make sense. So once I figured out the doors, everything cascaded. Everything from that point cascaded. And I started looking at all of this as, so this is passing of divine knowledge, the Mies. That's what this is. He's passing the Mies. They're passing the Mies of knowledge, because you can see they have a cup or a chalice in one hand and then the pine cone in the other. The pine cone is an ancient symbol for knowledge that some people associate with the pineal gland, but also it's a small version of the cypress tree of life in the center, it represents sacred geometry in the pine cone. So he's feeding that, and the top of their head is sitting in the middle door only. You see that? Meaning that the knowledge is being passed to the middle door. And then what we also have are guardians above and below. And so on the bottom, you have him standing on a lion. You see that? Mm-hmm. And the guardians above are eagles. Each one of these guardians represents the guardians of each realm. So there are 3 guardians that represent each realm. And you wonder yourself, why do they need guardians? Well, you get down this rabbit hole of realizing that everything isn't just random, and that they're actually guarding and maintaining the balance and equilibrium of all of those realms of reality. And that we're existing in something that's far beyond just a bunch of angry men with nukes, with buttons that can set off nukes. That there's an ancient understanding that's carried on long before us into deep antiquity, in which the guardians, the necessary, you could call them administrators of balance and in harmony in all different aspects, is fiercely maintained. And they use these guardians as archetypal guardians to show those different realms of reality. So when you get back to Egypt again, and you get back to the dynastic Egyptians, I have a really cool picture I want to show here, just really quick to
pivot.
A lot of people don't see this angle of the Sphinx. a lot of people see it from different angles and they don't realize that the head is unbelievably disproportionate to the body. Now, I was just in the British Museum and I got a chance to see these massive pink lions from Egypt, massive. And we know that in ancient Egypt, the lion was an important guardian, just like I showed you on the Kef bas-relief. Kailasa, India, same lions guarding it, right? It's a sacred guardian. And then when you look at the body of the Sphinx, you can see the head is completely disproportionate to the body, meaning that we firmly believe now, and a lot of archaeologists are coming on board. Dr. Robert Schoch, obviously, he's had that theory long before me, and John Anthony West, and a lot of others have firmly believed, based on the importance of this in Egypt, that the Sphinx was a lion. Okay? Now, we're going to keep that placeholder when we get into dating, because it's very important. But what you're now seeing is that these symbols are just carrying all around the world, okay? And so as I'm breaking the Kef bas-relief down, I'm noticed so many Hermetic concepts, but it wasn't until the altar of Ionis that this entire thing went into another whole phase of understanding. And I would say, Daniel, that as incredible as these discoveries have been, and there's some of them are pretty mind-blowing, this was probably the most important contribution I've ever had in my life, because this links everything that humanity has lost right here. So Ionis, I mentioned it's an incredible andesite temple in next to the Van region that had all these guardian symbols carved into it with wings, and so mysterious with his solar cross in the back that happens to be the same cross that we see in the Vatican and all of these mysterious places today, right? So what you're seeing in front of you is an alabaster altar, golden calcite alabaster that formed a T inside the Susi temple that has all the designs we followed around the world, the same pattern. And on the altar had these only two symbols repeating over and over again, as well as associated artifacts that came with it. Like there's a gold rod in the center that has the same two symbols repeating, and there's another artifact that you'll see in the next slide that contain it. Now, the image on the left is a drawing recreation of what the altar looks like because it's old and faded and it's hard to see. But essentially what it is, the three realms of reality have three guardians, and you can see them on the left on there. They all have wings. So this is a celestial temple. You have the Haldi human Anuna figure who's guarding physical reality. Then you have the lion who's guarding the underworld realms, who's like a lion dragon in this case. And then above is the eagle-headed lion. So eagles, just like on the Kef bas-relief. They just keep repeating over and over again. And I realized that there was a very complex set of knowledge that was being encoded into this. Now, go ahead and go to the next slide for me. The two repeating symbols on the altar and on all these artifacts, it was only two, and the guardians were fiercely guarding them. I want to emphasize that very strongly, is that these guardians are only guarding these two things. Now, even though there's a lot of other concepts that are part of their language and understanding of the universe, those weren't the symbols they were using here. There was a deeper understanding here that went further. Now, as I said, I'm an initiate of mystery schools. I've studied Hermeticism for well over 5 years, probably more like a decade. And I had been obsessed with this particular passage for years. You can watch old shows where I'm literally talking about it. And it's what it is that there's what's called the Hermetica. It's the core book of Hermeticism. And imagine that you have like a Bible-like book. And imagine the most important part of that book, right? All of it supports this one core thing. This is what that was. And I recognized it way before any of the stuff that I was doing now, and I was fascinated by it. And essentially, what it is that Hermes, if anyone knows, seen Hermes, he's with the wings, the caduceus, right? Hermes and the rod of Asclepius, that's all connected back to Hermes and Thoth. And that the wings represent knowledge. And you have the Kundalini rising up the spine, and they have all those symbols. Well, on this particular area, in this story, in Hermeticism, Hermes is having a hypothetical ancient conversation with God. And in this case, they refer to God as a great dragon. And I would like people to consider that a dragon is merely a winged serpent, and all the ancient serpent knowledge and how that links into the kundalini and the spine and the energy centers of the human, all of these things. So he's having a conversation with the great mind of the universe. He calls Poimander the great dragon. And he says, I wish to know the nature of God and the nature of man. And Poimander, God, answers and says, the nature of God and the nature of man is the same, which fundamentally that's profound to consider, right? To think that we've been told that we're an insignificant nothing in the universe and that we're a grain of sand on an infinite sand beach that doesn't matter at all, right? And here you have this core passage in Hermeticism that tells us, no, not so fast. The nature of you is the same as the nature of God. So that alone is very interesting. And it goes on to say that if you wish to know, if mankind wishes to find basically like ascension or its highest path, they simply must discover that they are made up of these two things and then learn what they are. Okay, and it states that God and man are made up of only two things: life and light. That might seem simple at first, but then you go into all kinds of ancient religious terms like the holy fire, right? The holy trinity, the holy fire, this flame. And you realize that's what they're talking about as life, as light, right? This holy flame of the universe that's in us, right? Everybody, you probably heard it, right? We have that flame of consciousness inside of us, and that we're like a being of light. Now, and people are wondering why we're light. We have a system of 7 primary chakras inside us, right? And within those systems, they mimic the exact colors of the visible light spectrum. So if you see a rainbow and you see the visible light spectrum red all the way up through, purple, you see that exact mirror representation is within our energy centers of our body. That's what the chakras are. Okay, they unlock based on that same concept, meaning that we literally are like light because we're made up of the foundation of light, but we're made up of something else too, life. Now, this is where it gets really interesting because life, as they've shown on the Kef bas-relief, as a tree and everything growing out of the underworld, they considered all of life to come from the underworld, which makes sense if you consider the microcosmic relationship of Earth itself as representing a miniature version of that. Mm-hmm. So think about it. You go outside, trees are growing out of the ground. It's a microcosm version of the underworld below, right? And all of life is coming from underneath, right? So they attribute that the same way. They considered the underworld the source of life, and and then it went up they imagine reality is like a metaphorical giant tree, right? The roots are in the underworld growing up, and then and then it blossoms with all of its leaves in the celestial. They consider that a model of the universe itself, a giant tree, and that we're not separate from that at all. And near is Earth, and that everything follows fractals of that understanding. So what does that mean exactly? I have this passage in my head that I've become obsessed with, right? That the nature of Poimander and mankind, God, is just life and light, life and light. So then meanwhile, I'm looking at the altar and I'm studying it. And I realized that the guardians are all guarding only 2 symbols: the circle for life and the flame. And it was like this explosion moment of realizing that the core of the most important ancient knowledge systems that then were later destroyed by monotheistic religions, and we'll get down that road in a minute, is literally the most important ancient knowledge center on Earth. That it ties us back to answer every single question that mankind has ever had. Who are we? What are we a part of? And they had all those answers. And they build, when people say like, why does everything have to be a temple? Because what would be a greater thing to build? You build temples to the universe to represent that connection and that relationship. And so here we have Ionis, and archaeologists believe it's a Urartine Iron Age culture that was fighting wars that somehow had the most sacred knowledge symbols in the world. That doesn't make sense. You don't have a culture that embeds the greatest knowledge ever and then doesn't follow it at all. It doesn't work. A culture is going to be represented by what its knowledge is. So I realized that this was proof of the oldest knowledge system on earth, which is oldest religion on earth, that predated Christianity by thousands and thousands of years. So then I started to put it all together. So before we get into Hermeticism, I want to just point this out. You then realize the T everywhere. If the step pyramid is the structure of the universe, then the T represents the balance of all of that. And the T's are everywhere, all in the ancient world. It was one of those complex symbols. And if you look at the T, it starts to make so much sense. The middle door being the biggest always is the stem of the T. And then the left and the right represents the left and the right doors. You're never going to look at the T ever the same way again, Daniel. Yeah, go ahead and go to the next one now. So once I started putting all that together, I realized it was a very complex and important knowledge system that was being handed down that literally represented everything. And I want to give briefly the story of this. We're not going to spend too long, but essentially,
The Da Vinci one.
Yeah, the Da Vinci Last Supper.
There you go. It's up at the bottom. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's give a little history here. Before monotheistic religions really existed, before Christianity, you had understanding of natural law of the universe, which is just this knowledge carried down from this, but it had become fragmented in pieces by then, okay? Hermeticism is the most intact of that, but there are other knowledge systems like Vedic text and other ancient texts that mirror a lot of that same knowledge, that same kind of understanding, okay? Ancient Mayan texts, other things like that. And in the 15th century, so 1400s, mid 1400s, you had Constantinople in the ancient world, which is today Istanbul, the center of what was then the ancient world. So Western Turkey, Eastern Greece, you had hundreds, if not thousands of people that followed Hermeticism. And it was like, that was the way to find God, all knowledge, understanding how everything worked. That was the basis of it, right? Most people don't know that Christianity actually largely began with mostly Hermeticism. But during the Byzantine Empire and the collapse of Constantinople, they were starting to incorporate other kinds of knowledge, and they did not like Hermeticism. Why? Because you don't need a church. The finding your own salvation is within. You have all the answers. So the church didn't like that. They weren't too keen on that. So what they did is they ended up going on a campaign to basically get rid of it. But in that process, so mid 1400s, you have, as Constantinople is collapsing, the end of that earlier age, you have this rise of Christianity with a lot of influences, and people felt really pressured in that area. So you had a mass migration from that region to Florence, Italy, one single location that was very open to all that knowledge and those things. And so there, the Hermetica was first translated into Latin, and it was carried through, and you saw the birth of one of the greatest, if not the greatest, Renaissance in our entire history because of the incorporation of Hermeticism into that culture. And Da Vinci then paints the famous image of the Last Supper with the three doors with Jesus in the middle, just like those Anuna gods with their knowledge being pointed to the middle door. Exactly the same thing. And how about the table is a giant T?
Oh, wow.
So what does that mean? It means that Da Vinci knew a lot of secret knowledge. How would he? Because Da Vinci was a member of secret society mystery schools. And he knew, but like Plato, he had to hide it or he would have been killed. So just like that, they hid it and these very clever things. And not only that, but the Vitruvian Man looks like a giant T. If a person stands up, puts their arms out and they put their legs together, we form a T. We are also that same representation. They understood there is no separation between anything. We are the microcosm of the macrocosm of the universe. So Da Vinci paints all this stuff. We have a Renaissance that everyone knows all about when all the cathedrals are built and all these incredible things happen. Meanwhile, the church is like, we do not like this at all. Why? Because Hermeticism predated the teachings of Moses. So they're like, how can we get rid of this? What can we do? So they hire a man named Isaac Casaubon who's an expert in ancient antiquities and translations. And he goes through and goes to the version they're using and says, look, the version you're using isn't as old as the teachings of Moses. But he fails to mention that it's been rewritten for thousands of years by other scribes and initiates. So he's trying to make a very misleading statement by saying, oh, the one you're reading isn't as old as the teachings of Moses. And so therefore it's illegitimate. And so they banish Hermeticism, burn people at the stake, banish people from doing that. Why do you think the whole St. Patrick's thing, which was before, but it's part of the same cleansing that had been occurring, of the snakes of Ireland and the UK, the snakes are the Druids and pagans who were following Hermeticism and natural law. It all connects, okay? So they banish it, burn everyone at the stake, Hermeticism goes in the darkness, and the rise of Christian and Catholicism, and that whole world emerges. All of this is buried and lost, right, until now. And they did not anticipate finding the connections back to the oldest knowledge system in the world. And I think I firmly believe that in the best way possible, Hermeticism will become the new world religion. And it should, because the way that religion became is corrupted and controlled, that forced people to not think that they can be independent in their own place of God, but they have to worship under someone else. And it created a control system that then created hell, blocking off one of the most essential places of knowledge. Remember that Kef bas-relief, how they're passing knowledge? That knowledge isn't coming from above, it's coming from below. That's why Ziusudra went down to the underworld too. We need to understand that what we have demonized into hell may be one of the critical points for consciousness to ascend. That begins there. Now imagine, again, we are the microcosm of this entire example. Imagine consciousness is like a tree. And if we don't root ourselves, we will never be able to grow. So if you're blocked off from the underworld, shadow work, understanding your deeper sides, moving through things that are preventing you from growing, you'll never be able to. And then, of course, they demonize and turn it into hell. We'll bring this to a bit of a conclusion before we move to the next dating area. This just gives you an example of what they were trying to leave us behind to understand, is that we've been told that we're nothing and we're insignificant. And they're showing that not only are we a part of everything, but we may be like the great expressions and actors that are basically like fractals of Source, God. And that we're here to experience everything we can and grow and learn to get to a higher state here. It's like a teaching school. And so they're showing how they're basically giving us a new model for the universe. I know that's wild to consider, but they're showing us that, look, if you understand the smallest part, you can understand the largest part. That's why a human eye looks like a nebula, and a human cell looks like the birth of a star system, and everything follows these patterns. And galaxies look like shells, and a hurricane looks like a galaxy, because what they were telling us is that the universe is not just dead, empty space, but it's a giant source field of consciousness, the entire thing. And that's why things evolve the way they do into patterns. That's why everything follows patterns. That's why when people go into DMT, they see sacred geometry. That is the code. It is the source code of the universe. And we are more like antennas that are tapping into it. That's why when someone becomes very healthy, they exercise, they drink only spring water, they deal with their shadow work, they get into ancient mysteries and go into higher knowledge. They ascend to a higher place, but more like they turn into a frequency antenna that dials directly into Source. That's why the Akashic records exist, and all knowledge that's ever existed doesn't get lost, because it's a giant source field of consciousness. So what we're talking about is not just proving lost civilizations, but proving they literally were masters of the universe, and that we were once masters of the universe. We lived in complete harmony with the earth, complete balance. And what I have left behind now is what I call the blueprint. And it's basically all the symbols they left behind, I've been able to crack and decode and put together in the book, where it basically lays it all down as a whole understanding of what their world was. That they wouldn't build with certain materials. They lived in harmony with understanding how everything functioned. They didn't have materialism. They didn't live with cell phones and cars and all this stuff, they lived in harmony with the earth. They believed that anything that broke harmony and balance was wrong. Now look at our world. Anything that people should be doing, people are everyone is gifted and everyone has keys to contribute to this society and the world, and that everyone was playing a part in this global humanity. It was literally like a utopia. They say a utopia is impossible, but it's impossible with the blueprint that we were given later. The broken, inverted version. The one that they have, the me's, the essential knowledge of how any civilization could function. They talked about how if that was lost, a society would eventually collapse. We're not talking about something that, oh, that may be nice to have. If you don't have it, society will eventually destroy itself. And look at where we are.
Almost like Buddha was potentially onto something with
100%.
the state of nirvana. Just before we go into dating, I mean, there's lots of stuff I want to say, but I don't want to kind of take the spotlight off you because you're on a fantastic role. But in relation to religion, it always, I've spoken about this on previous podcasts, but it always frustrates me the fact that we've got to accept religion as, pardon the pun, gospel, whereas we know that some of the stuff you've highlighted, like Gilgamesh and, you know, the Greek mythology, Norse mythology, that is just that mythology. And that's always been one of those, why are we cherry picking what we have to respect and appreciate as truth, or at least people's truth, spiritual truth? And this is just, this is the work of fiction. But segue into dating.
Exactly. And there's so much more truth than we understand in that. And if anything, like you said, it's been cherry picked and a lot of those other things have been hidden. So going full circle before we do dating is I do believe that this is known. I don't think I'm the first to find it. I'm the first to find it that's going to give it to the world, but I do think that they know about it. Let's just say I've seen things embedded in a certain creative media things that I'm like, okay, so they know. But like I said, if you create a giant system like that, you're not the one that's going to take it down, because then you look like the bad guy. And so I do believe that it'll be like this, oh, we believed that all along. And all of a sudden, because our attention spans are so short, I do think that our world will be transformed by this. But I think that who seemed like the bad guys will try to pretend they're the good guys now. Oh, we were the good guys all along. So just prepare for something like that. You know, having like a black cloak and then putting a white one on and be like, we're the same person, or we're not the same person or something, right?
Well, I don't trust anything from the mainstream in all avenues. So if they do start putting that black cloak on, I think I'll, certainly me and many other people, twig.
So basically what we now have is something pretty big, right? So now we can not only is it lost civilizations, but we have
the Last Supper shot. That's where you got me. That
it's been known for so long and it's been trying to be carried down, right? So, okay, so now we know that, let's talk about a bombshell to drop. So we were beautiful once and we can be beautiful again. We're such an incredible being of the universe, and this gives us everything back. So I strongly encourage people to not be surprised about where this is coming from. Don't think that this would come from a high-level academic. That's not how this stuff works. This kind of thing can't come from there. I only found it because I'm an initiate of mystery schools and I understood Hermeticism. Pretty much no archaeologists and geologists pretty much know that. So they wouldn't even know what they're looking for. You had to know that component to find it. And I had to have all the keys of every site to unlock it. You couldn't have one piece. Like when I didn't have Egypt, I wasn't able to unlock the rest of it. I think that was on purpose. I don't think they wanted this knowledge to end up in the wrong hands. So let's start here and we'll get into dating. I firmly believe this civilization was tracking cycles. They understood previous disasters and they understood another disaster was coming, in which imagine the knowing of we have a perfect civilization in harmony with the earth and the universe. Mystery schools, ascension schools, humanity is living in balance, and yet they know their own destruction is coming. And so what they do is encode the highest level of this knowledge into all of these ancient temples and structures so that knowledge is never lost. So that even when they're gone, long down the road, like a time capsule, it can eventually reemerge into humanity and bring us back into balance and equilibrium. And that's so poetic and beautiful. And when we talk about dating, we essentially can lump these into two major catastrophe periods. You could say three, but I'm going to lump the Younger and Older Dryas together in the same place. So what this is, and it's interesting because I want to caution people, is that they go try to look at this up yourself. There is a lot of climatology data manipulation. It is a huge thing. And I want to caution people on that, is that if you try to go look up Greenland ice cores, you're going to get all kinds of different stuff, okay? What you need to find are some of the earlier studies from back in the 90s that Graham Hancock jumped on top of that pointed out that were so shocking that they kind of got buried. And what it is we're looking at our world today and we think we're in such a crazy warm place that's never happened before. And oh my God, the weather's so wild. This is nothing compared to what happened before. If you look at that area that's shaded, or the area that's toward the left side, what you're looking at are temperatures and CO2 in Greenland. Now, the Greenland ice cap is only 20,000 years old. So when I go further, I have to use other dating mechanisms to do that, which we have. But the first one is identifying when these civilizations were destroyed. Well, Plato gives us that date from Solon. They tell us that all of those civilizations were destroyed 11,600 years ago. It's such a beautiful dating that they give, and it's based on a very specific date that then is shared that is acknowledged by ancient cultures around the world that have flood stories in every ancient culture, right? Now, remember the Ziusudra story, the flood. Be cautious, careful here though. That's not the same flood as the Younger and Older Dryas. Imagine the Younger, Older Dryas is what destroyed all the civilizations, or at the very end, which they could not recover from. But there was another initial event that came before, and that was known as the Last Champ Adams event. Now, where I got this from is when you look up the last geomagnetic excursion on Earth, which means the magnetic poles move and create basically chaos on the Earth. Imagine the Earth, anything physical that happens only occurs after energetic responses. The Earth is a giant toroidal field of energy, and that's not argued, but they don't really acknowledge the energetic components. So energy is flowing out from Antarctica, and it's flowing up into the top of the north. And that's how the energy of our planet. And the two poles balance that energetic center so that any giant earthquakes or huge events that happen on Earth are always in response to some instability that occurs in the energetic magnetic field first. I cannot emphasize that enough, okay? So when I found out that through these ancient kauri trees in New Zealand and these lava fields where they're studying the atmosphere from the lava bubbles and stuff, they determined that 41,500 years ago to somewhere around 41,000 to 42,000 years ago, the Earth suffered a massive geomagnetic excursion in which a bulge of water was thrown into part of the Earth because the whole planet tilted on its axis. And the water that was displaced all flooded like one part of the planet. Now, when you now get back to the ancient story of Ziusudra, with a great flood that wiped out that part of the world in which they sailed and didn't find any land, remember, and then found Ararat sticking up. This would exactly explain how an event like that could occur, because you would get such a displacement of water, and they describe it as being a 700-year period. Insane, where the poles wobble and then eventually return after 700 years. That is huge. So if we imagine Eridu Shuruppak being wiped out and the old world being wiped out, I firmly believe this is the event. Firmly believe it. And then we get into some really cool other stuff. Remember, let's get back to the Sphinx now. So the Sphinx was never a dynastic pharaoh. We know from so many of these guardian lions and that symbol, lions everywhere. Giant pink granite lions in Egypt museum. I just saw it in the museum, British Museum, right from Egypt. That we know based on the disproportionate size of the Sphinx that it was a lion head. Now, why does that matter? It matters because of the precession of the equinox. If it's a lion, it was a lion because it's facing the constellation Leo, because they understood as above, so below, as within, so without. That's Hermeticism. That's where that comes from, okay? So they have this giant guardian lion that is aligned to Leo, during a very specific time period to create a synergy as above, so below, create heaven and earth, right? Create the bond. But when? When was that aligned, right? The earth faces what's called the precession of the equinox. It is when there's a slight tilt or a wobble where it sort of goes like this, okay? It's not a perfect way that it rotates. And there's a whole cycle of where it starts to rotate and it comes around and then it returns. It's called the Great Year. So that entire cycle is called the Great Year, okay? But each age has its own time period. You know Mesozodiacs. So we are leaving the age of Pisces and moving into the age of Aquarius right now. Now, each age lasts 2,100 years. So when we look at this and we look at the Great Pyramids, but specifically the Sphinx, and we look at where Leo is, it does not align during dynastic times at all. So we know that they didn't build it. And not only that, but they didn't build the pyramids. All those pyramids were part of an ancient system that has nothing to do with mummies and burial tombs. That was all Herodotus and influences that were unfortunately created a false narrative there. There's never been a mummy ever found in any of the pyramids, any tombs. There's never been any of that, okay? So, and if anybody's wondering, I don't call them Khufu and Khafre. They're really the temple of the earth, sun, and the moon. The three. And the three just keeps getting repeated over and over again in everything. So, you have the Sphinx, who is a lion. You have Leo. And then based on the precession of the equinox, you just input it into a computer and you get only 2 previous ages that it can align. And this is that conversation that Jonathan West had with Robert Schoch, where they're like, is it 12,000 or is it 38,000 years ago? We're told it was built 5,000 years ago. Even the lesser date is still over double, right? Well, the problem is when we were looking at that ice core, 12,000 years ago, catastrophes on the earth, absolute catastrophes. There's no way a civilization would be able to build anything. So go back one previous age, and what do you get? 38,000 years ago. And when we look at the last Champ event as being 41,000 years ago, 41,500 years ago, it would give Ziusudra, his sons, and that civilization 3,000 years to reach Egypt. Plenty of time, right? So everything starts to fit into place. You see that? Everything starts to fit in where they were destroyed 11,600 years ago. The golden age emerged 40,000 years ago, call it. Egypt emerged as the climax of the global civilization at the Cosmograms in their biggest form 38,000 years ago. Then you got to fit in Tiwanaku and all these ancient places. And then, yes, the big question everyone's asking, that's what I think it became what we think of as Atlantis. Was that global civilization and Lemuria, Mu, all of that. That's what that was. Because what's the date? 40,000 years ago to 11,600? Over 20,000 years that they were able to master everything in ways that we can't even comprehend today. And they left all of those systems for us of knowledge to be able to bring them back and bring ourselves back into harmony, equilibrium. And I just want to add one last thing is that look at the Trinity within ourselves, okay? Mind, body, spirit, or soul. It represents the exact same structure of the universe itself, okay? So you have the physical reality and you have the 2 metaphysical realities, and they fall into that same concept. They left all of this behind for us to understand. So if we are an essential part of that, then you have the 3 pyramids representing the earth, sun, the moon, because we happen to live in a solar system that is the components and primary components of it is earth, sun, and moon. And the next connection, like with the Great Pyramids, is Orion, who happens to have 3 primary belt stars. All of it is a synergy connected to everything, okay? Now, I want to end with this because it's so beautiful, is that in Vaughan, you have all 3 of these sites. The underwater ruins that I dove down to, absolutely incredible to film that and be there for that. You have Ionis on the top upper right. You have Kef Kalesi below, and then the underwater ruins. Now, remember the 3 structures of reality, right? The 3 doors. Each of these flowers is just so beautiful. Each flower represents a flower for each realm of reality. And that really brings it home, I think, to conclude here, because So look at the underwater ruins. The symbol for them for life was a circle. You can see it right in the center. You see the two circles and then the seeds of life as a flower in the center. Seeds of life, like the underworld where we grow from. Then Ionis is a sunflower, a celestial flower to be the celestial higher realms. And then this is my favorite one of all, Kefkalesi representing physical structure of reality, a tetrahedron flower. It is so poetically beautiful. I couldn't have created anything more beautiful myself. Like that is, they were honoring every aspect of this. And if you look at the underwater ruins, it's a perfect circle. They made the ruins to be a perfect circle, to be a fractal of what they were building themselves, to represent the circle of life. So in conclusion, essentially, they were trying to create fractal microcosm relationships between everything in the universe. And they understood the one key component that we don't, is that all this is technology. I believe these are like realm gateways to those places, even star gateways for consciousness. And that's a whole nother conversation in itself. But at the end of the day, the fundamental thing we have to understand is that we have the three triptych in us. We're an essential component of how all of these technologies would work. Consciousness is the last piece. And once we realize that, the three becomes the four. And it's like this completion, like the cross at Ionis. It's this completion of a whole system in which we recognize that we are creator gods of the universe, that are a fundamental part of this entire experience, and that the universe may be this giant expression that is all playing out for us, right? As Shakespeare once said, all the world is a stage, and we're all playing our roles, and everyone has their exits and their entrances, right? And that was talking about far more than a real stage. That is the metaphorical stage of the universe in which we are walking that road, and we are playing that out here, right? We are the ones that are basically the actors of the great stage of the universe. I think people should remember that.
Yeah, poetic that, Matt. And it's a kind of phrase Graham Hancock uses, stuff just keeps getting older. But you've certainly backed that statement up. We're coming to the close now. This is normally where I would ask, what does challenge mean to you? But can you summarise if I ask you that question in a sentence?
Sure.
Because then I want to give a quick plug for the documentary
Sure.
as well. So what does challenge mean to Matt LaCroix?
My challenges in my journey and getting here, this whole journey has been extraordinary in my life. And there have been a lot of those moments where you have roadblocks where it really tests you. It really tests you on whether or not you're willing to keep going, right? Being in Turkey for the first time, every archaeologist telling me I was wrong, everyone, no. Even some of the experts being like, I'm not quite sure that we're with me. But when you don't give up, when you follow your heart and you follow your passions and you never let anything stop you, you may never believe where that road will lead, but it will always lead where you're supposed to go in your journey. And I don't think most people are actually following where their journey is supposed to go because they're not listening to this. They're too much in here. They need to understand that there's a higher self, there's a higher connection, there's a higher path that we're supposed to be following. We just need to learn to listen. And so for me, the challenge to overcome was actually listening and surrendering and finally realizing that we're part of something far greater.
Beautifully answered. Before we wrap up, Matt, where can people keep an eye out for the documentary? Have they got a release date? Any info
Yeah,
on that?
so we need to film in Egypt because of this, and that's what we're working on right now. That should be in June. And then I'm right in the middle of all the editing. I actually just met with my editor in London. That's one of the reasons I'm here. We got a chance to do all the narration. We're putting the whole thing together. We're looking for a Q4 release of this year. Should be big. And we're talking, Netflix, Discover or something. So
wow.
Look for that. And then there will be a missing key too. Okay. Both a book and the documentary in which we could go. We're going to go to all the locations we couldn't go, including Kailasa and Saudi Arabia and all these places. And lastly, if anyone wants to be part of finding lost history, and we absolutely do, please join me for both. I have a June and a September tour. Things are very safe in Eastern Turkey. You have nothing to ever worry about. Honestly, it's a lot safer than US cities, to be honest, that area. So I really encourage people, if they want to be part of Lost History, to join me on those adventures before the world finds out about this.
Awesome. Well, we'll put all the links in the description to all those tools and your social media handles. And the links to the book as well, so people can buy a copy of that. Matt, I've really enjoyed speaking to you. I feel like I could probably do a 7-hour podcast for you. So you'll have to come back when you've been to those other places.
Absolutely, Daniel.
We'll do a part 2. I've enjoyed it, man.
Cheers, man.
Thanks so much for your time. I've been Daniel Hodges. This has, of course, been the incredible Matt LaCroix, and you've been listening to the Hodgecast. Take it easy.
Join me this June and September of 2026 to explore ancient sites around the Van region, including Ionis, Chavus Tepe, Kefkalese, and even the underwater ruins. Places that may change our entire understanding in the future, providing the origin point for so much that we're about to uncover.